Della Mercer pressed the darned edge of her shawl against her mouth so the whole platform wouldn't hear her breaking. She'd crossed 600 miles of Texas summer dust to marry a man who now stared at her like a bill he never ran up. Because Caleb Hartley never wrote those letters. He never sent for a bride, and the little girl hiding behind his leg was about to confess exactly why. Before we go on subscribe, stay with this story to the very end and tell me in the comments what town you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Della Mercer stepped down from the stage into the worst heat of a Texas summer, and the first thing she did was let go of the doorframe so nobody would see her hand shaking. 600 miles of dust had done their work on her. The hem of her traveling dress had come loose somewhere past the Red River, and she'd pinned it with a straight pin that dug into her ankle every time she moved. Her shawl was more darn than wool. The carpet bag she carried had a broken clasp she held shut with her thumb. She knew what she looked like. She had known it for 2 days, watching the other passengers gather their skirts away from her on the bench. She lifted her chin anyway. "Clear water," the driver called down, already reaching for the mailbag. "Anybody meeting you, ma'am?" "A Mr. Hartley," Della said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Mr. Caleb Hartley, we've an arrangement." The driver went still for half a breath. Then he handed down her bag without meeting her eyes. "Well, there's Hartley yonder." She turned. There were maybe a dozen people scattered along the boards outside the station. Men leaning on posts, 2 women with market baskets, a boy chewing a stalk of grass, and every one of them had stopped whatever they'd been doing to look at her. Not at the stage. At her. At the darned shawl and the pinned hem and the sunburn across the bridge of her nose. And standing apart from all of them, hat in his hands, was a man who looked like he'd been struck. He was tall and lean, the way ranch work made men lean, sleeves rolled jaw dark with a day's growth. But it was his face that stopped her. She'd built a whole picture of him from 4 letters, warm, careful, a man who chose his words slow. This man wasn't looking at her like a bridegroom. He was looking at her the way you'd look at a bill you didn't remember running up. "Mr. Hartley," she said. "That's my name." His voice was low and rough. "Do I have—" "We met, ma'am." Something dropped in her chest. She made herself walk toward him, the carpet bag banging her knee. "Della Mercer, from Ellsworth County, Kansas." She waited. Nothing changed in his face. "You wrote to me." "No, ma'am, I didn't." The words landed flat between them. Behind him, half hidden by his leg, a small girl watched. 7, maybe 8. Dark hair in a braid coming undone, a smear of flour on one cheek, and eyes that were far, far too bright. The eyes of a child watching something she'd built come toppling down. Della saw those eyes. She didn't understand them yet. But she saw them. "Sir," she said carefully, "I have your letters, 4 of them, signed in your hand." She set the carpet bag down between her feet and worked the broken clasp open. "I have your name, and I have this station's name, and I have the date, which is today. I did not cross the whole of Indian Territory on a guess." "I believe you've got letters." Caleb Hartley's jaw worked. "I'm telling you, I didn't write them. I never sent for a wife. I never sent for anybody." One of the market women behind him made a small sound, not a word, just a sound, the kind a person makes when a show gets good. Della heard it. She always heard those. "Then somebody sent for me using your name and your money," she said quietly. "Because the marriage broker took $9 for the passage and told me it came from Clearwater." That reached him. She watched it reach him. His eyes moved not to her but down and to the side to the little girl, half hidden behind his leg, and Della watched the color go clean out of his face. "Nora," he said. The girl flinched. "Nora, look at me." The child looked up. Her chin was already wobbling. "Papa." "Did you write these letters?" The whole platform had gone silent. Even the driver had stopped hauling the mailbag. And in that silence, the little girl's face crumpled all at once the way a child's does when the thing they've dreaded finally arrives, and she pressed both hands over her mouth and nodded. "Oh, Nora." Something in the man's voice broke and hardened at the same time. "Oh, what have you done?" "I only wanted—" The girl couldn't get it out. Tears ran down through the flower on her cheek. "I only wanted—" "Not here." Caleb's hand came down on the child's shoulder, and Della saw it wasn't rough. It was the opposite. A man holding on because the ground had shifted. "We are not doing this here." But it was already being done there. The two women had drifted closer. The men had straightened off their posts. And one voice, a woman's clear and carrying and delighted, cut through the heat. "Yeah. Well, isn't that something?" Caleb Hartley's little girl went and ordered him a wife out of a catalog. A ripple of laughter. "And look what came in the mail." Della turned her head. The woman speaking was handsome and well-dressed in gray silk that hadn't seen a day of real weather, a parasol on her shoulder, a smile on her mouth that never once reached her eyes. Around 50, Della judged, and the kind of 50 that had spent its whole life being the one who decided things about other people. "That'll be enough, Mrs. Vance," Caleb said, not turning around. "Not turning. I'm only observing." Mrs. Vance's gaze traveled down Della from the sunburn to the shawl to the pinned hem, slow and thorough, taking inventory. "Though I do wonder what sort of woman answers a letter from a man she's never met and shows up in another woman's cast-offs. In Clearwater, we generally know where a person comes from before we let them stay." "Ma'am?" Della said it before she'd decided to. The word came out level and cool. "You know where I come from. I told the whole platform not a minute past. Ellsworth County, Kansas. I'll write it down for you if your memory's poor." Somewhere a man laughed a real laugh, surprised out of him. Mrs. Vance's smile thinned to a wire. "It talks," she said. "It reads and it ciphers too," Della answered. "Which is more than most furniture." The laugh came again. Two men this time, and Della felt the platform tip a half-inch back toward her. She'd learned that a long time ago in rooms harder than this one the crowd goes to whoever refuses to bleed. You did not weep in front of people who came to watch you weep. You made them laugh instead, and you did it before they could. But Caleb Hartley wasn't laughing. He was looking at her now, really looking for the first time with something that wasn't warmth, but wasn't the bill collector's stare anymore either. It was closer to the look a man gives a horse that just did something he didn't expect. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "your business is your own, and I'd thank you to let mine be mine." He crouched down to the girl's height, one knee in the dust, and lowered his voice, though not so low Della couldn't hear it. "Nora, we're going home, you and me, right now. And on the way, you're going to tell me everything, and I mean every word." "But Papa—" Nora's eyes went to Della, wide and stricken. "What about her?" And there it was. The whole crooked thing hung on those three words. Caleb Hartley went still, his knee still in the dust, caught between his fury at a child and the fact of a woman standing on a public platform with a carpet bag, and no place on earth to go. Della decided to make it easy for him. It was a habit. Making it easy for men who couldn't decide. "Mr. Hartley." She picked up her bag. "You didn't send for me. I understand that now, and I don't hold it against you or the child. Point me to a boarding house and I'll trouble you no further. I'll write the broker tomorrow and get myself back north." "Back north on what stage?" the driver said, not unkindly coiling his line. "Next one through Clearwater's Thursday. 4 days. And Miller's boarding house burned in the spring ain't been rebuilt. 4 days. No boarding house. $9 gone to the broker, and maybe $2 left sewn into her hem." Della kept her face very still the way she'd trained it, but the arithmetic ran cold and fast behind her eyes, and she knew the whole platform was doing the same arithmetic and arriving at the same answer, which was that she had nowhere in this world to sleep tonight. Mrs. Vance's smile came back. "There's always the church steps," she said sweetly. "God takes all sorts." Caleb Hartley stood up. He didn't say anything at first. He put his hat on, and he settled it, and he looked at the woman in gray silk for a long moment, and then he looked at Della, and then down at his daughter, whose small hand had crept into his and gripped like she was drowning. "Miss Mercer," he said, "you've had a long ride and a poor welcome, and none of it's your fault. My daughter did a thing she had no business doing, and it fell on your head, and that ain't right." He worked his jaw. "There's a room at my place used to be my sister's. You'll take supper and a bed for the night, and tomorrow we'll figure the rest of it out like Christians. That's the best I've got. Caleb Hartley." Mrs. Vance's voice cracked like a dropped plate. "You cannot take a strange woman to your home, a widower, with a child. Have you any idea what will be said?" "I've got a fair idea, Cordelia." He didn't even look at her. "You'll be the one saying most of it." He picked up Della's carpetbag before she could stop him, and his hand brushed hers on the handle, and he pulled back like he'd touched a stove. "Miss Mercer, wagons this way." Della looked at the man and the child and the woman in silk and the whole staring town. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than the two small words could hold. The wagon ride out to the Hartley place took the better part of an hour, and for the first quarter of it, nobody said a word. Della sat on the bench with her carpetbag on her knees. Nora sat wedged between her and her father, small and rigid, staring at her own hands. Caleb drove with his eyes fixed on the mule's ears, like they might tell him what to do. It was Nora who broke first. Children always did. "Miss Mercer?" A whisper. "Nora." Her father's voice was quiet warning. "I only wanted to say, I'm sorry, Papa. I can say sorry, can't I?" Caleb let out a breath through his nose. "Say it then." The girl turned on the bench to face Della full on, and it cost her something to do it. Della could see the way it costs a child to look a grown person in the eye when they've done wrong. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry I said I was Papa. I'm sorry I took the coins from the coffee tin. I'm sorry you came all this way and got a poor welcome like Papa said." She swallowed. "But I ain't sorry I wrote you, because you wrote back nice. You wrote back the nicest of anybody, Nora." Caleb's hands tightened on the lines. But Della had turned too. "Anybody," she said. There were others. The girl nodded, miserable and proud all at once. "I wrote to 3 ladies, from the paper. Papa's got a paper comes from Fort Worth, and it's got the advertisements in the back. The ladies looking for husbands. And I copied Papa's letters he wrote to the bank, so I'd know his hand. And I wrote to 3. And 2 of them wrote back, mean or wanted more money than I had. But you—" Her voice wobbled. "You wrote back and asked what I liked to eat. Nobody ever asked me that." Della sat very still on the swaying bench. She remembered writing that letter. She remembered thinking it was strange a bridegroom asking after her favorite foods and thinking it kind, and thinking God help her that maybe she'd finally drawn a decent one. She had written back that she was fond of dried apples and had a weakness for good coffee, and asked in return what the child liked because a letter had mentioned a little girl, and the little girl had written back, in a bridegroom's hand, because the little girl had been the bridegroom all along. "You asked me back," Nora whispered. "You asked what I liked, and I said molasses on cornbread, and you said you'd learn to make it good. Nobody ever said they'd learn a thing for me, not since Mama." The word landed in the wagon like a stone in a still pond, and the ripples went out and out. Caleb Hartley didn't say anything. His jaw was working, and his eyes were fixed hard on the mules, and Della saw a muscle jump in his cheek, and she understood all at once the whole shape of the thing. A man who'd lost a wife, a little girl who'd lost a mother, a house gone quiet, and a child who'd done a wild, wrong, breathtaking thing, not out of mischief, but out of a grief so large she'd tried to mail-order her way out of it. Della's own eyes stung. She looked out at the mules too. "Nora," she said when she could, "that was a very foolish thing you did." "Yes, ma'am." "You stole from your father, and you told a lie, and you dragged a stranger halfway across the country under false colors, and any of those alone would have earned you a switching." "Yes, ma'am." The girl's head was down. "And it was also," Della said, "just about the bravest fool thing I ever heard of, and I've heard of plenty." Nora's head came up. "Miss Mercer." Caleb's voice was tight. "Don't, please, don't tell her it was—" "I'm not telling her it was right. I'm telling her it was brave." Those aren't the same, and she's old enough to learn the difference." Della looked at the child. "It was wrong, and you'll answer for the wrong part. But a girl who loves her papa so much, she'd write letters as him to fetch him a wife that's not a bad girl, Nora. That's a girl carrying more than she ought to." She paused. "How long since your mother passed?" 2 years. It was Caleb who answered low. 2 years this July. Summer then. Her passing had come in summer, and here was another summer hot and dry, and full of her absence, and the child had done the arithmetic of it, same as everyone else, and decided somebody had to fix the empty chair at the table. Nobody spoke again until the ranch came in sight. The house was smaller than Della had let herself imagine, and plainer, and she was glad of it. A grand house would have been one more thing to be judged against. This was a working house, a widower's house, clean, but not tended, a place where things got done, but nothing got softened. Caleb helped her down from the wagon out of plain habit, his hand hard and quick, releasing her the instant her feet touched ground. "Nora'll show you the room," he said. "I've got to see to the stock. There's cornbread from noon, and there's beans on. It ain't much." "It's more than the church steps," Della said. That startled a sound out of him, not quite a laugh, but the cousin of one. He looked at her a moment longer than he needed to, then touched his hat and walked off toward the barn, and Della watched him go, and thought, "There's a man who's forgotten what his own voice sounds like when it's easy." Inside the girl was a different creature. Away from the town, and the staring Nora Hartley came alive, and she showed Della the room, a narrow bed, a washstand, a window, with the fierce hospitality of a child who has been saving up a welcome. "Aunt Sadie slept here before she married Mr. Coombs and went to Abilene," Nora reported. "The quilt's got a burn on the corner, but it's a good quilt, and there's a nail for your shawl and a peg for your dress." She stopped, looked at the darned shawl, looked at the pinned hem, and something crossed her small face, the first true understanding of what she'd done, the real cost of it printed on the ruined clothes of a stranger. "Miss Mercer," she said in a very small voice. "Are you poor?" "Nora, I only ask because you look poor, and if you're poor, then I done a worse thing than I thought, because I fetched you all this way, and now Papa's going to send you back, and you'll be poor and far from home both." Della sat down on the burned quilt, so she was level with the child. "I'll tell you the truth," she said, "because you're old enough for it, and because you've earned it doing what you did. Yes, I'm poor. I've been poor since my own father died, owing money he couldn't pay, and the men he owed came to collect, and there wasn't a husband nor a brother to stand between them and me." She kept her voice even. "So when a nice letter came from Texas, asking what I liked to eat, I thought maybe my luck had turned." She looked at the girl. "It hadn't turned the way I thought, but I'm not sorry I came. You want to know why?" Nora nodded wide-eyed. "Because you asked me what I liked, and you meant it." Della reached out and carefully tucked the loose end of the girl's braid behind her ear. "That's a rarer thing than you know, Nora Hartley. Rarer than gold. Don't you let anybody teach you it's a small thing to ask a body what they need. It isn't." The girl threw her arms around Della's neck so fast and so hard it knocked the breath out of her, and that was how Caleb Hartley found them when he came in from the barn. The strange woman on his sister's old bed, with his daughter wrapped around her like ivy. Both of them, wet-eyed, the last of the summer light coming gold through the window. He stood in the doorway a long moment. "Supper's cold if you want it," he said rough, and turned and walked back out. Supper was cold beans and colder cornbread, and the kind of silence that has weight to it. Della ate. She'd gone hungry enough times to know you ate what was set in front of you and thanked God for it, and she said the thanks out loud plain, and saw Nora's eyes go round at a stranger praying at the Hartley table where no one had prayed in 2 years. It was Caleb who couldn't stand the quiet. "You said your father died owing money." Della set down her spoon. "I did." "How much does it signify?" "It signifies to me." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his plate. "Mrs. Vance and the rest of them are going to spend tonight deciding what you are. By tomorrow, it'll be all over Clearwater. I'd sooner hear the truth from your own mouth than the lie from theirs." He looked up then. "So, how much?" $240, Della said. "At the time of his death. It's more now with the interest, though. I've paid down what I could, taking in wash and sewing, and once, God forgive me, dealing faro in a house I won't name in front of the child." Nora's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "I'm not ashamed of it," Della went on steady, "because I never did the other thing that house wanted me to do, though I was asked plenty and offered more than washing wages to do it. I dealt cards. I kept my dress on and my accounts straight, and I paid the men my father owed a little at a time. And when I couldn't stand that town's memory of me one more winter, I answered an advertisement." She held his eyes. "That's the whole of it, Mr. Hartley. There's no husband hid back in Kansas, and no baby left on a doorstep, and no crime the law wants me for. There's just a dead father's debt and a living town's memory and a woman who got tired of both." She picked her spoon back up. "You wanted the truth. That's the truth. You can send me back Thursday with a clear conscience." For a long moment, the only sound was the tick of a clock somewhere and the far-off complaint of a coyote starting the night's work. It was Nora who broke it in the way of children who have been holding a question too long. "Miss Mercer, did you truly deal cards?" "Nora, that ain't yours to ask," Caleb said. "It's all right." Della turned to the girl. "I did. In a room full of men who'd lost more than they could pay and blamed the cards for it instead of themselves. That's what faro is, Nora, grown men handing over their wages to feel lucky for an hour." "Was it wicked?" "The room was wicked. I did my best not to be." She gathered the plates as she spoke, rising, moving to the basin without asking leave, because a woman who sat idle in another body's kitchen was a woman waiting to be waited on, and Della Mercer had never once in her life been waited on. "Sit," she told Caleb when he half rose. "You worked all day and I sat on a stage. Let me earn my keep for one night before you decide whether I've got any." He sat back down slow, watching her hands in the water, like he'd never seen the plain fact of a woman washing up in his house. "Papa doesn't let anybody touch Mama's dishes," Nora said softly. Della's hands went still in the basin. "Nora." Caleb's voice was low. "He don't, though. Mrs. Vance's cook came to help after the funeral, and Papa near took her head off for putting Mama's blue plate in the wrong place." The girl looked at the plate now drying in Della's careful hands, the same blue plate, and her eyes filled. "You're holding it right, Miss Mercer. You're holding it just how Mama did." The kitchen went so quiet, Della could hear her own heartbeat. She set the blue plate down gentle as a sleeping child, exactly where it had been. "Then I'll be careful of it," she said, "for as long as I'm let to touch it. A woman's dishes hold her some, my mother's did." She dried her hands on her ruined skirt. "There now, that's the least I can do and the most I'm owed. Mr. Hartley, thank you for the supper and the bed. I'll not forget either." Caleb Hartley looked at the blue plate in its right place on the shelf, and then at the woman who'd known without being told exactly where it went. "That woman today," Caleb said finally. "Mrs. Vance. You went right at her." "I did. Most folks don't. She owns half the notes in this county. Her late husband was the bank near enough, and she's got the say of it now. People are afraid of her." He turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the table. "You weren't." "I've been afraid of worse than a woman in a nice dress," Della said. "A woman in a nice dress can only take your name. I've had men come for a good deal more than that, and I'm still here." She met his eyes. "Fear's a habit, Mr. Hartley. You can break it same as any other. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's done." Something moved behind the man's face. He looked at her the way you'd look at a language you used to speak and had half forgotten. "You talk plain," he said. "I had it beaten out of me to talk pretty. Plain's what's left." She almost smiled. "I expect you find it wearisome." "No." He said it quick, then seemed surprised at himself. "No, it's my wife talked plain. Mary. She'd have—" He stopped. His hand went flat on the table. "It's late. Nora bed. Miss Mercer, that room's yours tonight. We'll settle the rest tomorrow." But tomorrow came into the room right then uninvited in the form of hoofbeats in the yard. Caleb was up and at the window before the knock came. Della saw his shoulders change, saw the ranch hand come up in him, wary, reading the dark. "Who is it, Papa?" "Stay put." He opened the door on a night gone full dark, and a man on a lathered horse hat in his hand. "Hartley, sorry to come so late," the rider's voice carried in. "It's Tom Bright. Cordelia Vance sent me. She's calling a town meeting tomorrow noon at the church. Says it concerns the woman you brought out." A pause, and the rider had the grace to sound ashamed. "Says the whole town's got an interest in who's living out here near their families. She wants you both there. Says if you don't come, it'll be decided without you." Caleb stood in the doorway a long moment. "Tell her we'll be there," he said. "Caleb, tell her we'll be there, Tom. And tell her something else." His voice had gone very level, very quiet, and Della, watching from the table, felt the hair rise on her arms. "Tell her Miss Mercer reads and ciphers and speaks for herself, and if Cordelia Vance wants to hold a trial, she'd best be ready for the accused to talk back." The rider swallowed. I'll tell her that. Good night, Tom." The door shut. The hoofbeats faded. And Caleb Hartley stood with his hand still on the latch, his back to the room, breathing like a man who'd just done something he couldn't take back. Della rose from the table. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "You could have let them settle it. You could have handed me over to the Thursday stage and been shut of the whole business, and no one in that town would have blamed you. It's not too late. Take it back." He turned around. "My daughter wrote you," he said, "because she couldn't bear the quiet in this house one more day. I've been so deep in my own grief I let a child carry hers alone for 2 years till she about broke herself trying to fix what I wouldn't touch." His jaw worked. "That's my sin, Miss Mercer, not yours, and I'll not have you pay for it in front of the whole town while I stand by. I don't know what you are yet, but I know you're not what Cordelia Vance is fixing to call you. And I know my Nora asked you what you like to eat, and you wrote her back kind." He drew a breath. "So no, I won't take it back. Take it." Della stood in the low lamplight in her borrowed room in a stranger's house, 600 miles from a home that had never wanted her, and looked at a man she'd known for 6 hours who'd just set himself against the most powerful woman in the county for the sake of her name. "Molasses on cornbread," she said. He blinked. "What? You asked what she liked." "Nora, it's molasses on cornbread." Della's voice wasn't quite steady now. "I promised her I'd learn to make it good. I keep my promises, Mr. Hartley. It's about the only thing I've got left to my name that nobody can take. So if I'm to stand up in that church tomorrow and be tried, I'll do it. But I'll do it as a woman who keeps her word." She lifted her chin the way she had on the platform hours and a lifetime ago. "You'll find that's more than most of them can say." For the length of a held breath, Caleb Hartley looked at her. Then he did something she hadn't seen him do since she stepped off the stage. He took off his hat slow and held it against his chest, the way a man does at a graveside or a wedding or any place the ground turns holy. "Good night, Miss Mercer," he said. "There's fresh water in the pitcher. We ride at 11. And he went out, and the door closed soft behind him, and Della Mercer sat down on a burned quilt in a dead woman's room and pressed the darned edge of her shawl against her mouth so the whole house wouldn't hear her at last begin to cry. She didn't sleep much, and what sleep she got, she gave up before the light did. By the time the sky had gone from black to gray, Della had the stove going and her sleeves pushed back and a bowl in the crook of her arm, and she was beating cornmeal and buttermilk into submission with a wooden spoon, like it had said something about her. She'd found the molasses on the second shelf behind the flour, half a jug of it gone hard and sweet at the bottom. She'd found the blue plate too, and this time she took it down on purpose and set it on the table where a person would sit to eat. She was sliding the pan into the oven when a voice came small and disbelieving from the doorway. "You're making it." Della didn't turn around. "I said I would." Nora crossed the floor in her nightgown, bare feet quick on the boards, and stopped an arm's length off, like she was afraid the whole thing might turn out to be a dream she'd wake from. "With the molasses. With the molasses. For me. For you. Now Della turned and she crouched down and she looked the girl in the eye. You wrote a stranger and asked her a question, Nora Hartley, and she gave you her word. Today, a whole town full of people are going to stand up and tell you that woman's word isn't worth the paper it came on. Della wiped a smear of flour from the child's cheek with her thumb. So I aim to prove them wrong before we even leave the house. That's the first thing. You understand me? Whatever they say in that church, you'll already know it's a lie, because you'll have it the proof off that blue plate with your own 2 hands. Nora's chin trembled. She threw her arms around Della's neck, and this time, Della was ready for it and held on. That was how Caleb found them for the second time in a day, and he stopped in the doorway the same as before, hat already in his hand, though the sun was barely up. But this time, he didn't turn and walk out. He stood there, and he smelled molasses and hot cornbread in a kitchen that hadn't smelled of anything but coffee and grief for 2 years, and something in his weathered face came apart and got put back together, wrong softer than before. Sit! Della told him, rising brisk, because she couldn't bear the look on him 1 second longer without giving way herself. It's hot and it won't stay that way. Nora, wash those hands, they've got the whole barnyard on them. He sat. He watched her cut the cornbread and lay a square of it on the blue plate, and set it down in front of his daughter, and he watched Nora pour molasses over it in a slow, shining ribbon, her tongue between her teeth in concentration, and he watched the girl take the first bite and close her eyes. Well, Della said. Nora chewed, swallowed, opened her eyes. Mama's was good, she said carefully. This is good too, different good. Then quick, like she was afraid she'd hurt somebody. Is it all right to say that? That it's good too? It's exactly right to say that. Della told her, and did not look at Caleb because she could feel him not looking at her. Both of them holding very still around the enormous, fragile thing the child had just set on the table between them. Caleb ate his in 3 bites and said nothing at all, which Della was coming to learn was the loudest thing he did. They rode into Clearwater at 10:30, and they were not the first to arrive. How many you reckon? Della said, watching the wagons and saddle horses thicken along the road as they came up on the town. All of 'em. Caleb's hands were easy on the lines, but his jaw was set. Cordelia doesn't call a meeting for a quorum. She calls it for a crowd. She wants everybody watching when she does the thing. And what's the thing she means to do? He was quiet a moment. Run you off, he said finally. Make it so. No house in this county'll take you. No store'll sell to you. No soul'll say good morning till the only thing left for you to do is climb on Thursday's stage and be grateful for it. She's done it before. There was a schoolteacher 4 years back. He stopped himself. It doesn't signify. Point is, she does it clean. No shouting, no mob. Just a room full of respectable folks agreeing out loud that you don't belong till you believe it too. And you? Della kept her eyes ahead. What do you mean to do, Mr. Hartley? The mules walked 6 paces before he answered. I mean to sit beside you, he said, and let 'em wonder. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a vow. It was a plain, flat statement of a plain, flat man, and it went through Della warmer than any pretty speech ever had, and she had to look hard at the road for a spell to keep her face in order. The church was the biggest building in Clearwater, and it was full to the walls, and the murmur of it dropped by half when Caleb Hartley walked in with the ragged woman from the stage and his little girl between them. Della felt the eyes go over her the same as yesterday, the shawl, the hem, the sunburn, and she did the same thing she'd done yesterday, which was to lift her chin and refuse them the satisfaction of a woman who looked at the floor. Cordelia Vance stood at the front by the altar rail in fresh gray silk. She had a little table set up beside her with papers on it squared off neat, and she had the Reverend hovering at her elbow, looking like a man who'd been volunteered for something he wanted no part of. Caleb, Mrs. Vance said, warm as a hostess. We'd near given you up. Do sit, and your guest? She let the word hang. There's room at the front. I do like folks where I can see them. We'll stand at the back, thank you, Cordelia. As you like. She turned to the room and her voice changed. Rose took on the smooth carrying weight of a woman who had presided over 100 such rooms. Friends, neighbors, I'll not keep you from your work long, it being harvest weather, and hot as the devil's own kitchen besides. A ripple of dutiful laughter. But a thing has happened in Clearwater that touches every family here, and I'd be failing my Christian duty if I let it pass in silence. Here it comes. Caleb murmured so low only Della heard. Yesterday, a woman arrived at our station, unknown to any of us, unvouched for by a living soul. And I say this with charity, in a condition that spoke of a hard road and harder circumstances. Mrs. Vance's gaze found Della and rested there gentle, terrible. And within the hour she was carried off to live beneath the roof of a widowed man and his motherless child, with no marriage, no chaperone, no kin, and no accounting of who she is or what she's fleeing. Now, I ask you all plain, is that a thing we allow? Is that the sort of arrangement we want our daughters to see as ordinary? A woman 2 rows back said clear, "It is not." And several heads nodded, and Della felt the room lean, felt it start to go the way Vance was pushing it, the way water goes downhill. "I'll speak," Della said. The whole church turned. "You'll have your turn, dear," Mrs. Vance said. I'll speak now." Della stepped forward out of the shadow at the back and walked up the center aisle of that packed church with her broken carpet bag left behind, and her pinned hem showing, and her chin up, and she did not hurry, and she did not falter, and by the time she reached the front, there wasn't a sound in the place, but her own footsteps. She turned and faced them all. "My name is Della Mercer," she said. "I'm from Ellsworth County, Kansas, and Mrs. Vance is right, that not a one of you knows me, so let me fix that since she's gone to such trouble to gather you." Her voice was steady, and it carried. "My father was a horse trader who drank his profits, and died owing $240 to men who don't forgive a debt. I was 19. I had no husband, and no brother, and no money, and those men came to our house, and I learned that year what a woman alone is worth to the world, which is exactly nothing unless she makes herself worth something." She swept the room with her eyes. "So I made myself worth something. I took in wash till my hands cracked. I sewed for women who wouldn't be seen speaking to me on the street. And yes, she said it before anyone could throw it down like a card, face up on the table. For 2 years, I dealt faro in a gambling house because it paid, and because it kept me off the road. My father's death had otherwise laid out plain in front of me. I dealt cards. I never did worse. And I paid down every dollar that drunk man left me, a nickel and a dime at a time, till I couldn't stand my own town's face any longer, and I answered an advertisement and got on a stage." She let that sit. "That's who I am. There's no husband hid, no crime, no child abandoned. There's a debt, a hard history, and a woman who's still standing after both. Mrs. Vance means to make you afraid of me. I'd ask you to look at me and tell me honest what there is to fear." For a moment, one whole held breath. Of a moment, the room was hers. Della felt it. A man near the front had taken his hat off. A young mother was looking at her with something that was almost recognition, almost kinship. And Cordelia Vance smiled, because Cordelia Vance had been saving something. "How refreshing," she said, "to hear a woman confess before she's asked. It quite takes the wind out of a body's sails." She lifted the top paper off her neat little stack. "Though I'll admit I did some asking of my own. There's a wire office in this town, Miss Mercer, as I'm sure you know, being a woman of the world. And it happens, the wires reach clear to Kansas." Della went cold from the crown of her head down. "I took the liberty this morning of sending a message to the sheriff of Ellsworth County." Mrs. Vance held the reply up delicately, the way you'd hold a dead thing by the tail. "He was so obliging as to answer before noon. Shall I read it to the room, or would you rather—" "Cordelia," Caleb said from the back, low and dangerous, starting forward. "Read it," Della said. Every eye swung to her. "You went to the expense of a wire to Kansas and back," she said, and her voice did not shake, though God knew it wanted to. "You'll not now deny this room the pleasure of it on my account. Read it, Mrs. Vance. Read the whole of it, not the parts you like." A flush came up under the powder on the older woman's face. She read, "Della Mercer known to this office," she read. "Daughter of deceased debtor. Employed 2 years at the Silver Garter Gaming House." She paused for effect on the name. Let the church gasp its little gasp. No warrants, no charges. A smaller pause, an unwilling one. Paid family debt in full spring last. Left in good standing. Mrs. Vance's mouth tightened. She had reached the part she did not like. This office has no complaint against the woman. The silence changed shape. No complaint. Della repeated into that silence, gentle as anything. You wired the law in the town that knew me best and worst, Mrs. Vance, and the law wired back that it has no complaint against me. You spent good money to prove me honest. I do thank you for it. I couldn't have done it myself for less than $1. Somebody laughed. It broke out of a big man near the window, a helpless bark of a laugh, and it cracked the room open, and then more of them were laughing. Not cruel now, but the other way, the way a crowd laughs when a bully overplays a hand. And an old woman stood up. She was 70, if she was a day dressed in mourning black, gone brown at the seams, and she came up out of her pew, slow on a cane, and the laughing stopped out of respect for however many years she was carrying. "Hetty," Mrs. Vance said, "sit down, nobody's asked you." "Nobody ever does," the old woman said, "which is how I've kept my good sense so long." She turned her back on Cordelia Vance, deliberate, and faced Della, and looked her up and down the same as everyone had, but her eyes were different, older, tireder, and they saw a different thing. "You dealt faro at the Silver Garter." "I did, ma'am. My husband died in a house like that one. Not that one. One like it in Dodge 20 year gone." Hetty Sloane's voice was dry as a creek bed. "And I'll tell you what I learned burying him. It ain't the woman dealing the cards that ruins a man. It's the man that can't quit sitting down at the table." She turned her head and pinned the whole church with one filmed old eye. Every soul in this room knows a man who drank his farm or gambled his family's bread, and not a one of you ever called a town meeting about him. But a poor woman gets off a stage in a mended shawl and you fill the church to bursting. She thumped her cane once on the floor. "I'm ashamed of the lot of you. I'll take her wash, and I'll say good morning to her on the street loud, so's you can all hear me do it." She sat back down. And in the wake of it, a few, not many, but a few, and Della counted every one. A few heads nodded, and a young mother reached over and squeezed the old woman's hand. Della thought for the space of a breath that it might be over, that she might have won. Then Cordelia Vance set down the Kansas wire and picked up a different paper, and Della saw the shape of the real thing coming, the way you see a hawk's shadow slide across the ground before you ever look up. "How touching," Mrs. Vance said. "How very touching. Sentiment is a luxury, Hetty, and I'm glad you can afford it. Some of us have to think about money." She smiled, and this time it reached all the way to her eyes, and that was the most frightening thing Della had seen since she got off the stage. Because this isn't finally about the woman's past friends. I don't care 2 pins where she dealt her cards. This is about property. This is about what's owed. She turned the paper so the front rows could see the seal at the bottom of it. Most of you know my late husband held the paper on a good many places hereabouts. What most of you may not know is that when he passed, those notes came to me, all of them, including, and now she looked at last, not at Della, but past her to the tall, silent man at the back of the church, including the note on the Hartley place. $1,400, Caleb, with 2 payments behind and a third coming due in September. I've carried you 2 years out of respect for Mary, rest her soul, out of pity for the child. The church had gone dead quiet again. Della didn't dare turn around. She could feel Caleb behind her like heat off a stove. "Now," Mrs. Vance went on, soft, reasonable, ruinous. "A man carrying that kind of debt has got to be careful of his reputation. A note-holder's got to feel her money's in steady, sober, respectable hands. She's got to trust the man." The parasol tapped once against her skirt. "I would find it very hard, Caleb, very hard indeed, to keep carrying a man who's flaunting a gambling house woman under his roof in front of the whole county. It would look to a careful woman of business like poor judgment. And poor judgment is the sort of thing that makes a note holder call what she's owed. She spread her hands, all regret. I don't want to. Lord knows I don't. But you'll see I'd have no choice. There it was. The whole trap sprung at last, and every jaw in it. Keep the ragged woman, lose the ranch. Della understood in one sick rush why the schoolteacher 4 years back had gotten on the stage. Vance never raised her voice. Vance never told a soul what to do. She just stood in front of you and quietly arranged the world so that doing right cost you everything you had, and then she let you make your own choice and called it Christian charity. Della turned around then. She had to. She had to see his face. Caleb Hartley stood at the back of his own town's church with his daughter's hand in his, and $1,400 of debt hung around his neck in front of every neighbor he had, and his face had gone gray and shut. The bill collector's face from the platform, the closed-door face, and he was not looking at Della. He was looking at nothing. He was looking at September. Well, Caleb, Mrs. Vance said, gentle as a mother. It's an easy thing. Put the woman on Thursday's stage. I'll even pay her passage. That's how little I wish her harm, and we'll say no more about payments. Or keep her. The parasol tapped. And we'll say a great deal about them. Caleb opened his mouth. Papa's not putting her anywhere, Nora said. The child's voice cut through the church clear as a struck bell, high and furious and shaking, and every head turned to the little girl standing between the ragged woman and the silent man. Nora, Caleb said. Hush. I won't hush. She wrenched her hand out of her father's and stamped one small foot on the church floor. You all sit there so mean, and Miss Mercer made me cornbread with molasses this morning off Mama's blue plate, and nobody's touched Mama's blue plate in 2 years, not since. Her voice broke, and she plowed straight through it, the way children do. And she asked me what I liked. She's the only grown person in this whole town that ever asked me what I liked, and you want to put her on a stagecoach 'cause a mean old woman says money. That is enough. Mrs. Vance's calm cracked just at the edges, just for a second, but Della saw it, the flash of a woman who could not abide being defied by a child in front of a crowd. Caleb, control your— No, Caleb Hartley said. He said it quietly, but he stepped forward when he said it, one long step out from the back wall, and put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, and Della watched the gray leave his face, and something harder come into it, something that had been buried under 2 years of grief, and was digging its way back up into the light. No, Cordelia, I'll not control her. She's saying the only honest thing that's been said in this church all morning, and she's 8. He drew a breath. I've got to think on the note. I'd be a liar and a fool to stand here and tell you I don't with a child to feed and a third payment coming. So I'll not give you your answer today, and I'll not be pushed to it in front of 40 people, which I reckon is exactly why you did it in front of 40 people. His jaw worked. But I'll tell you what I can say. I'll not put a woman out on the road today to save myself a hard month. My Mary would climb up out of her grave and switch me for it. So Miss Mercer comes home with us, and I'll wrestle the rest of it out where it's my own business, and not the whole county's entertainment. He took his hat off of the peg by the door where he'd hung it, and put it on, and looked at Cordelia Vance with a flat, cold courtesy worse than any anger. Good day to you, he said. Nora, Miss Mercer, we're going home. And he turned and walked out into the summer glare, and Della and the girl went after him. And behind them, the church erupted into 40 voices at once. And somewhere in the middle of it, clear and defiant, old Hetty Sloane calling out, Good morning, Miss Mercer. A right good morning to you. Della didn't cry until they were a mile out of town, and then only a little, and only because the child had fallen asleep against her arm. Caleb drove without speaking for a long time. When he finally did, it wasn't to her quite. It was more like a man thinking out loud and letting her overhear it. $1,400, he said. I knew it was bad. I didn't know she'd bought the paper. I thought it was still the bank. He shook his head slow. She's been sitting on it 2 years. Waiting. 2 years I've been tipping my hat to that woman in the street, and she's had a rope around my neck the whole time, just waiting on a reason to pull it. He looked at his own hands on the lines. And I handed her the reason, yesterday. Off a stagecoach. You could still take it back, Della said quietly. It was the second time she'd offered him the door. I'll go Thursday. She'll pay my passage, she said so. You keep your land, you keep your girl fed, and no one thinks the worse of you for it. Half that church would call you sensible. Caleb was quiet a long spell. When Mary was dying, he said finally, she made me promise her a thing. She said, Caleb, don't you go hard. You've got a hardness in you, she said, that only I've ever softened, and when I'm gone, it'll grow over you, like brush over a fallow field, and Norah'll be raised by a fence post. His voice roughened. I promised her I wouldn't. And then she died, and I broke that promise before the dirt settled. 2 years I've been a fence post. 2 years that child's been talking to a fence post and asking a fence post what's for supper, and getting grunts back. He shook his head. This morning I walked into my own kitchen, and it smelled like a home again on account of a stranger my daughter mail-ordered. And you want me to trade that back for $1,400? He almost laughed, and there was no humor in it. No, Miss Mercer, I don't reckon I do. God help me, I don't reckon I do, though I'll be damned if I know yet how I'll pay for it. Della looked at the sleeping child against her arm, and the hard, tired man beside her, and the empty road, and she made herself say the thing she did not want to say. Then you'd best let me earn my keep, she said, and not as a guest. If I'm the reason that woman calls your note, then I'm the reason it gets paid. Put me to work, Mr. Hartley. Real work. I can cook and clean and sew, but I can also cipher and keep books, which I'd wager you haven't done proper since Mary and I can deal. I can figure a man's odds faster than he can. That's the one useful thing that House taught me. You've got a debt to beat, and I'm good with a debt. Let me help you beat it. That's the price of my keep, not charity. Work. Caleb turned and looked at her, and for the first time since the platform, there was neither suspicion nor grief in his face, but something else. Something that took her a moment to place, because she'd seen it so seldom aimed her way. Respect. All right, he said. All right, Miss Mercer. God help us both. You've got work. And that was how the silent war began. It ran on for the better part of 2 weeks, and it was fought with no words at all, which was the only kind of war Clearwater knew how to fight. The town's part in it was simple. When Della went in with Caleb for supplies, the mercantile went quiet. Men who'd have said good morning to any woman alive found the far shelf of great interest. The wives crossed the street, not all of them, and not always, but enough that a body counted it. Della learned to walk into a silence, and buy her flour, and walk out of it without letting her spine bend. And she got better at it every trip, and she noticed that made them angrier than tears would have. The worst of it came the second week at the mercantile with Norah at her side. She'd laid her list on the counter, and old Pettigrew, the storekeeper, had looked at it, and looked at the door, and gone a peculiar color, and said low, not meeting her eye, I'll have to see the color of your money first, Miss Mercer. New policy. For accounts that ain't established. I've got cash money, Mr. Pettigrew, Della said evenly. Same as I had last week when you didn't need to see it. New policy, the man repeated miserably, and she understood. Somebody had leaned on him. She could guess the name. Now that's just good sense, Wallace, said a voice behind her, asking to see it up front. From her. Della turned. The woman was near her own age, plump and prosperous in sprigged calico, a wedding band flashing, and she wore the particular smile of a person who has come to a place hoping for exactly this. Mrs. Foley, Pettigrew said, unhappy. I only mean it's prudent. Ada Foley set her basket down and looked Della over at her leisure. A woman comes to town with nothing and moves straight into a widower's house well. A body wonders what she's really after. And there's only one thing a landless woman's ever after, isn't there? Same thing they're all after. She let it hang delicate as poison. The land. Poor Caleb, he doesn't see it. Men never do, but we see it. She's not there for that child. She's there for the deed. The word went through Della like cold water because it was clever, and because she knew it would travel, knew that by supper time, half the county would be saying it. She's after the land, she's after the deed, and a lie like that didn't need a shred of truth to walk clear across Texas. "Nora," Della said without turning, keeping her voice light. "Wait for me out front, honey. Count the horses on the rail. Tell me how many when I come." The child hesitated, her small face fierce, but she went. Della waited till the door had shut behind her, and then she stepped in close to Ada Foley, close enough that the woman's smile wavered. "You've got a fine warm home, Mrs. Foley," Della said, quiet and pleasant, so only the two of them and the storekeeper could hear. "A husband who comes in at night. Children, I'd guess by that basket. You've never once in your life had to wonder where you'd sleep or trade your dignity for your dinner, or stand in a church and hear your name read off a wire." She held the woman's eyes. "So I'll forgive you not knowing what a woman like me is really after. I'll tell you plain, and you can carry it home and serve it up with the rest of your gossip. I'm after a full stomach and honest work and a bed that's my own. That's the whole of my greed. And if that little girl waiting out front counts me family before this is done, then I'll have got more than I ever dared ask the Lord for. And it won't be a deed, and it won't be dirt." She stepped back. "You may quote me. Get it right." She turned to the counter and laid down her coins one at a time, click, 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 in front of the whole store. "My flour, Mr. Pettigrew," she said. "There's your color. It's the same as anybody's." And a dry old voice from the doorway said, "Put it on my account, Wallace, and don't you dare argue." And there was Hetty Sloane on her cane, having heard the last of it, glaring the room into submission. "Good morning, Miss Mercer. I count 4 horses on that rail, same as your girl. She's a sharp one." Della walked out with her flour and her spine straight, and she did not let a soul in that store see what it had cost her. But Ada Foley's words rode home in the wagon, with her quiet and patient as a splinter, and she knew the way she'd learned to know things, that of everything said against her, yet that one she's after the land was the one with teeth. That one would come back. The town's part in the war was to say it. Della's part was to make herself impossible to send away. She got up before the men, and she went to bed after the child. She took the ranch's books, which were 3 years of shoved-in receipts and unpaid attention, and she spread them on the table one night and worked them till the lamp guttered, and in the morning she laid it out for Caleb. Plain what he owed, what he was owed, where the money leaked out where it could be damned. She found $40 owed to him by a cattle buyer he'd been too proud to done, and she wrote the man a letter over Caleb's signature that got the $40 in 9 days. She figured that the north pasture, which Caleb ran a handful of scrub cattle on out of habit, would fatten more head than he'd ever put there, and she showed him the numbers till he believed them. She fixed the kitchen so a body could cook in it without walking a mile between stove and table. She patched the roof of the smokehouse herself up a ladder in the killing heat, with her mended hem tucked into her waistband, because Caleb was out with the stock and it needed doing, and she was not a woman who waited for a thing to be done for her. And she taught the child to read. That was the part that undid Caleb in the end, more than the books, or the roof, or the recovered $40. He came in one evening bone-tired and found his daughter sitting at the table with her finger under a line of print, sounding it out slow. The horse ran to the water. And Della beside her with her chin in her hand, patient as stone, and when Nora got the last word, the child looked up at her father with her whole face shining and said, "Papa, I read it. I read the whole thing myself." And Caleb Hartley had to go back out on the porch for a minute, and Della let him go, and neither of them ever spoke of it. But the town's war and Della's war were not the only two being fought, and the third one was the one that scared her. There'd been a night midway through that first week when the three of them had laughed. It came out of nothing, Nora doing an impression of Pettigrew going pale over Della's grocery list, puffing her cheeks and stammering, New policy, till Della lost her hold on herself and laughed out loud. And then Nora laughed, to see her laugh, and then, from the end of the table, Caleb Hartley made a sound. A rusty, cracked, unfamiliar sound, like a hinge that hadn't turned in years. He was laughing. He had his hand over his mouth like a man caught doing something forbidden, and his shoulders were shaking, and for about 4 seconds, the Hartley kitchen held a family in it. Then he heard himself. Della watched it happen. She watched the man remember mid-laugh that he was $1,400 in debt to a woman who wanted this exact gray woman gone, and she watched him take that warm, broken sound and strangle it right there at his own table and set his face back to stone. "Bed, Nora," he said, standing scraping his chair. "It's late." "But Papa, it ain't even—" "Bed." And he took his coffee out to the porch to drink alone in the dark, the way a penitent takes his punishment, and Della sat with the child and pretended not to have seen a thing. Because Caleb Hartley was thawing, and she could see him fighting it. She'd catch him watching her across the kitchen and see him make himself stop. He'd start to say a thing at supper, some easy thing, some near-warm thing, and then September would cross his face, $1,400, and a woman in gray silk holding the rope, and he'd shut it back down and go quiet and hard. And Della would watch the door close and understand exactly why. A man that far in debt could not afford to want anything. Wanting was for men with money. And she was whatever else she'd become in his house, still the reason the rope was tightening. "You went stiff again," she said to him one night when Nora was abed, and the two of them were the last ones up him at the table with the recovered ledger, her at the basin. She'd decided plainness was the only currency she had that he valued, so she spent it. "You do it 3-4 times a day now. You start to be a person, and then you catch yourself, and you go back to being a fence post. I've watched it a fortnight." She dried her hands. "You needn't do it on my account. I know what I am to your accounts. You don't have to keep reminding us both." Caleb set down his pencil. "It's not on your account," he said. "It's on mine." He rubbed his face with both hands, weary past speaking of. "Every time she comes due in my head, Cordelia the note September, I remember I can't afford to—" He stopped himself hard the way he always did. "Can't afford to what?" Della said. And for one breath she thought he might say it. She thought the door might come the whole way open. He looked at her across the lamplit kitchen, and there was $1,400 and 2 years of grief and a dead wife's last plea all in his face at once, and his mouth opened hoofbeats in the yard. The same as before. The very same, a rider coming hard in the dark, and Della felt the bottom drop out of the 2-week piece they'd built board by board. Caleb was at the door before the knock. He opened it on Tom Bright again, hat in hand again, but Tom Bright's face this time was not embarrassed. It was scared. "Caleb!" The rider was out of breath. "Sorry, God, I'm sorry to be the one Cordelia sent me with a paper. She said, give it to you tonight, not tomorrow tonight in your hand." He held it out, and it had a seal on the bottom of it, and his hand was not quite steady. "It's got the lawyer's mark on it, Caleb, from Fort Worth. I don't know what all it says. But I know she wouldn't send a Fort Worth lawyer's paper out to a man at 9 o'clock at night to tell him good news." Caleb took it. He broke the seal by the light of the door and read it once fast, and then again slow, and Della watched the 2 weeks drain out of his face, and September rush in early. "Caleb," she said. "What is it? What's she done?" He lowered the paper. "She's not waiting till September," he said. "She's not waiting till September," he said. He held the paper out to her, and his hand wasn't steady either now. "Read it. You're better with lawyer talk than I am. Tell me I'm reading it wrong." Della took it to the lamp. She read it twice the way he had, and the second time she read it slow, because the first time her eyes had skidded off the words like they couldn't bear to hold them. "You're not reading it wrong," she said. "Say it plain. What's it mean?" "It means there's a clause in your note." She set the paper down on the table, careful like it might go off. "A man misses 2 payments, the holder can choose to call the whole balance at once instead of waiting on the schedule. It's called acceleration. Most men never read that far into a paper because when they sign it, they're grateful, not careful." She looked up at him. "She's calling it Caleb. All $1,400. Not in September. Now. You've got 30 days from the date on that paper. Pay it in full, or she takes the ranch and sells it to satisfy the debt." Tom Bright, still standing in the open door, made a low sound. 30 days. Lord above, there ain't a man in this county could raise 1,400 in 30 days, not in summer, not with the cattle not sold yet. "Tom." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Ride home. You've done what she paid you to do, and I don't hold it against you. Go on. Kiss your wife." The rider went shamefaced, glad to go, and the hoofbeats faded, and then it was just the two of them, and a sleeping child, and a lawyer's paper on the table, and 30 days. Caleb sat down heavy. He put his face in his hands. "There it is," he said muffled. 2 years I climb out of a hole, and the day I finally get my head above the dirt she buries me for good, and it's my fault. I gave her the reason. If I'd sent you off Thursday like a sensible man— "Stop that!" Della said it sharp enough that his head came up. "Stop it right now. You want to sit there and chew on your own leg all night, you go right ahead. But do it after we've done the arithmetic, because self-pity's a luxury same as sentiment, and neither one of us can afford it before September." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat and pulled the recovered ledger toward her and opened it. "Now, $1,400, 30 days. Let's find out how impossible it truly is, because impossible and hard are two different words, and men give up at the first one when they mean the second." He stared at her. You're sitting there doing sums," he said, "and she's fixing to take everything I've got." "I'm sitting here doing sums," Della agreed, "because that's the only thing I've ever found that talks back to a woman like Cordelia Vance. She works in paper, Caleb. Notes and clauses and wires and seals. You can't beat her with your fists, and you can't beat her with your feelings. You beat her with better paper, or you don't beat her." She dipped the pen. "So, what'll the North Pasture cattle bring sold now?" It took him a moment to climb down out of his despair far enough to answer. But he did. She watched him do it, watched the rancher come back up in the Drowning Man, and she thought there's the one Mary married. 40-some head fit to sell, he said slowly. In a good year, at a fair price. $9–10 a head. Maybe $400. 400. She wrote it. What else? Nothing else. That's it. That's the whole of what the place can throw off before fall. He rubbed his jaw. 400 against 14. We're 1,000 short, Della. $1,000 short in 30 days. It can't be done. It can't be done the way you've always done it, which is to sell your cattle for whatever the first buyer offers, and thank him for the privilege. Della's mind was already 3 moves ahead, the way it went when she'd worked a table reading the whole board at once. How many head could you gather if you drove not just the North Pasture, but everything you've got that'll sell every steer, every dry cow the lot, and pushed 'em all the way to the railhead at Fort Worth instead of dumping 'em on the first local buyer? Caleb blinked. The railhead's 4 days' drive. I've not got the hands to— How many head, Caleb? He did the sum in spite of himself. 100. 110. If I stripped the place near bare and gambled next year on it. 100 head at Fort Worth prices, not Clearwater prices. Della's pen moved. $12–13 a head where the buyers compete for you instead of you begging them. That's $1,300, Caleb. 1,300 against 14. She looked up, and for the first time that night there was something like a fire in her. That's not 1,000 short. That's 100 short. And 100 short is a hole a body can climb out of. That's not impossible. That's just hard. Caleb Hartley looked at the ragged woman across his table, doing sums by lamplight at 10 o'clock at night with a lawyer's ruin sitting between them, and something moved across his face that Della had no name for. Mary used to do that, he said quiet. Turn a thing over till she found the handle on it. I forgot a person could. Then don't forget again. Della closed the ledger. We drive to Fort Worth. We need hands, and we need to move fast, and we need it done inside 3 weeks, so there's margin for the road. It'll be the hardest month of your life and mine, and it might still fail, and I'll not lie to you and say different. But it's a chance, and a chance is more than we had 2 hours ago. She stood. Now go to bed. You'll need your legs under you tomorrow, because tomorrow we go find you hands. Finding hands turned out to be the second lesson in exactly how far Cordelia Vance's arm reached. They started with the neighbors, because that was how a drive got done on the frontier. A man gathered his cattle and his kin, and his neighbors pitched in, and he pitched in when their time came, and it went around like that, and nobody got rich, but nobody got left. Caleb had ridden other men's drives a dozen times. He'd earned the help he was going to ask for. The first place they rode to was the Reese spread 4 miles north, because Josiah Reese was the closest thing Caleb had to a friend left in the county, an old widower himself, 60-odd, who'd stood up at Caleb's wedding and dug at Mary's grave with his own hands. Josiah met them at his gate and did not open it. "Caleb." The old man wouldn't look at Della at all. "I heard you was coming. Figured you'd want the loan of my boys and my remuda for a drive." "That's the truth of it, Josiah. I'm in a bad spot. 30 days to raise 1,400 or Cordelia takes the place. I wouldn't ask if—" "I can't." Josiah Reese said it fast like a thing he'd practiced so he could get it out before his own shame stopped him. "God knows I want to. You know what you are to me, boy, you know it. But she holds my paper too, Caleb. $600 of it. And 2 days ago, a fellow rode out from town and made it real plain that any man who helps you make that Fort Worth drive will find his own note called the week after." The old man's voice cracked. "I've got 3 grandchildren living under my roof since my Sarah's girl passed. I can't gamble their beds on your drive. I can't. Don't ask me to. Please don't ask me to." Caleb was quiet a long moment. "I'm not asking you to," he said, finally gentle. "Go on back and Josiah, kiss those grandbabies. This ain't your fight, and I'll not make it yours." They rode away from the Reese gate in silence, and it was Della who broke it, because she'd been doing the arithmetic on more than cattle. "She's not just after your ranch," Della said. "What? Think on it. She wired Kansas the very morning I arrived. She had my whole history inside a day. She's been sitting on your note 2 years patient as a spider. She bought up Josiah Reese's paper too, and Lord knows how many others. And now she's got a man riding the county threatening every soul who might lift a finger to help you." Della shook her head slowly. "That's not a woman defending the town's morals from a gambling house woman, Caleb. That's a campaign. She was ready for this before I ever stepped off that stage. I just gave her a door to walk through that looked respectable, but she was already standing at the wall looking for the door." She turned to him. "The question that's been eating me since we left that gate is why? Why your place? Why Reese's? What's a woman with more money than God want with a handful of dusty hardscrabble ranches she has to ruin good men to get?" Caleb had no answer, but the question had teeth, and it rode home with them, and it would not let Della sleep. Nor did the next days give her rest. Because it wasn't only the neighbor's hands that Vance had reached it, was every road out of the trap one by one. Della had a plan for a buyer. There was a cattleman named Dunmore, who came through Clearwater twice a season, a fair dealer by all accounts, and if Caleb could sell even part of the herd to Dunmore, up front for cash, they'd have a stake to fund the drive on the rest. Caleb rode in to find him at the hotel where he always stayed. He came home with his face like a shut door. "Dunmore's gone," he said, swinging down. "Left this morning, 2 days early." He looped the reins hard around the rail. "Clerk at the hotel wouldn't hardly look at me, but there was a fellow in the lobby, a drummer didn't know me from Adam, and he was happy enough to talk. Said Dunmore got a private word last night from a lady, a well-dressed lady." Caleb's mouth twisted. "Said the lady told Dunmore that any buyer who did business with Caleb Hartley this season would find Clearwater a mighty unfriendly town to come back to. So Dunmore left, just like that. Didn't even leave word." Della stood on the porch and felt the walls come in another inch. "She's closing every door before we get to it," she said. "The neighbors for hands, now the buyers for cash. She's not waiting for us to fail Caleb. She's making sure of it. Then how in God's name do we drive 100 head to Fort Worth with no hands and no stake in 30 days that's already down to 26? His voice wasn't angry. That was the worst of it. It was flat going toward Beaton. "Every road you find, she's already stood a man across it. Then we find a road she hasn't thought to block," Della said. But she said it more to keep the both of them upright than because she'd found one yet, and Caleb heard that too, and went inside without answering, and the screen door clapped shut behind him, like a period at the end of a hard sentence. She found the answer 3 days later, and she found it from Hetty Sloan. Della had taken the old woman a basket, some of the smokehouse ham, a jar of the plum preserves she'd put up plain. Thanks for a woman who'd said good morning in a store when nobody else would. Hetty had made her sit and drink coffee, and they'd talk the way women talk when one of them is old enough to have stopped being afraid of anything. And somewhere in it, Della had said the thing that was eating her. "I can't work it out, Miss Hetty. Why Caleb's place? Why Reese's? What does she want with them?" Hetty Sloan set down her cup. Her old eyes went sharp. "You don't know," she said. "Well, I suppose there's no reason you would being new. But I'd have thought Caleb—" she snorted. "No, Caleb wouldn't. That boy's had his head so far down in his grief these 2 years, he wouldn't notice the sky fall. Child." She leaned forward. "You ever wonder why this town's called Clearwater?" Della went very still. "Water." "Water?" Hetty nodded grim. "This is dry country. You've seen it. In a bad summer, half the wells in this county go to mud, and half the creeks to dust. But there's water that never fails, girl. There's a spring that comes up cold out of the rock, and feeds a creek that runs green all summer long, dry year, or wet, and it has since before the Comanche, and every drop of it comes up on land that belongs to—" She let it hang. "Caleb," Della whispered. "Caleb Hartley's north section. His granddad settled it for exactly that reason. That spring's the reason there's a town here at all." Hetty's voice dropped. "Now, you want to know what I know I keep to my house, child, but folks forget an old woman's got ears. There's been railroad men in Clearwater 3 times this spring, surveyors with their sticks and their chains. And you know where they go every time first thing. They ride out and they look at that spring. Because a railroad can't run on hope, girl. It runs on water. Them engines drink it by the ton. And a rail line's coming through this country inside 2 years, and the company that owns the water the trains drink." She spread her gnarled hands. "That land's not worth $1,400, child. 2 years from now it's worth $20,000. 50. And Cordelia Vance has known it since before the first surveyor's dust settled, because Cordelia Vance always knows first. That's the whole of her genius, knowing first." The old woman sat back. "She's not ruining Caleb Hartley to teach a fallen woman a lesson. She's ruining him to steal a fortune, and she's using you to do it clean, so the whole town cheers her on while she robs a widower and his little girl blind. That's your answer. I hope it helps. I don't see how it can." Della rode home with the whole ugly shape of it clear at last, and it did not help exactly. But it did something else. It burned the fear clean out of her and left something harder in its place. Because Ada Foley had stood in that mercantile and told the whole store that the ragged woman was after the land, and all the while it was Cordelia Vance in her gray silk who was after the land and had been for years, and had dressed her greed up in Della's sins and sold it to the town as virtue. The accusation had been true. Somebody was after the deed. They'd just pinned the wrong woman with it. But the rumor didn't care whose name it wore, and 2 days after Hetty told her the truth, the lie came home and put its hands on the child. Nora had begged to go into town with Caleb for the mail she'd been writing her Aunt Sadie in Abilene, sounding out the words herself, now proud of everyone. And she'd wandered the 20 feet from the post office to the water trough while her father was inside. And that was long enough. When Caleb came out, she was standing rigid by the trough with her fists balled, and 3 older children backed off from her in a half circle. And one of them, a boy of 11 or 12, was chanting it in the sing-song children learn from their mother's kitchens. "Nora's got a card-sharp mama. Nora's got a card-sharp mama, come to steal the ranch away." Caleb crossed that street in about 4 strides, and the children scattered like quail, and he got down on one knee and took his daughter by the shoulders, and Della, who'd stayed in the wagon because a trip to town was a battle now, and she picked them careful. Della saw the whole of it from 30 feet off and could not reach them in time to do a thing. The child wasn't crying. That was what undid Della later thinking on it. Nora wasn't crying. She was too angry to cry. She looked her father dead in the eye, and she said loud enough for the whole street to hear it. "She is not a card sharp. She is my mama now if I say she is. And you tell them, Papa. You tell them right now in front of everybody, or I'll do it myself." The street had gone quiet. Faces in the store windows. Ada Foley frozen on the boardwalk with her basket. And Caleb Hartley knelt in the dust of Clearwater's main street with his little girl's ultimatum ringing off the storefronts and every soul in town waiting to see what the debt-ridden widower would do. He stood up. He turned around slow, and he found the boy who'd been chanting half-hid now behind a rain barrel, and he found the boy's mother 2 doors down, pretending to sweep a clean step. "Miss Tanner," Caleb said, and his voice carried flat and clear. "Your boy's got a song. I expect he learned it at home. You tell him and you tell whoever taught it to him that the woman living under my roof came to my girl when nobody else in this Christian town would and taught her letters, and that's a sight more than any of you have done for a motherless child in 2 years. And the next time I hear that song, I'll want to know from what kitchen it came." He set his hat. "Come on, Nora, we've got our mail." He lifted the child into the wagon, and she pressed herself against Della's side, still stiff and furious, and Della put an arm around the small shaking shoulders, and said nothing at all, because there wasn't a word big enough, and Caleb climbed up and drove them out of that silent, staring town, with his jaw set, like a man carved out of the same stone the spring came up through. It was a good deal later, back at the ranch, that Nora finally cried not over the children, but over something else entirely. "Miss Mercer," she whispered when Della was tucking her in. "I said you were my mama. In front of everybody. I said it before I asked you." Her lip trembled. Is that all right? You can say no. I know you're not really. I know I only wrote you a letter. But Nora Hartley." Della had to stop and gather herself before she could go on. "In my whole life, nobody has ever paid me a higher compliment than you just did in that dusty street, and I have been paid compliments by men who wanted a great deal more from me than a card game. You call me whatever your heart tells you to call me, and you'll never once hear me say no to it. Now go to sleep. We've got a war to win in the morning." She told Caleb that night all of it, the spring, the railroad, the whole ugly shape of it. "The spring," he said. "She wants the spring. She wants all of it, the land the water's on, and she'll take it for the price of a debt, and the town will thank her for it because she taught them to look at me instead of at her hands." Caleb stood at the window with his back to her for a long time. "My granddad dug the first stock tank off that spring with a mule and a slip," he said. "My daddy widened the creek. Mary used to take Nora down there in the hot part of the day and let her splash till she was tuckered." His voice was very low. "And a woman in a nice dress means to take it with a lawyer's clause and call it Christian. And there's men I've known my whole life won't help me stop her because she's got a rope on them too." He turned around, and his face was terrible. "It's too big, Della. It's not $1,400 and a hard drive anymore. It's 20,000 and a railroad, and a woman who's been 3 moves ahead of me since before I knew we were playing. We can't win this. Good men can't win this. She's already won it. She won it years ago. And there it was. The thing Della had been dreading worse than any lawyer's paper. The despair. The going hard. She could see it coming up over him like the brush over the fallow field Mary had warned about, and she knew that if Caleb Hartley decided he was beaten, then he was, and no sums of hers could save a man who'd quit. And then, as if she'd smelled the despair on the wind and come to feed it, Cordelia Vance drove her buggy into the Hartley yard the very next morning. She came alone in fresh gray silk, a parasol against the sun, and she did not get down. She sat up in her buggy and looked down at the two of them the way a person looks at stock they're pricing, and she smiled her smile that reached her eyes. "I'll not stay," she said. "I only came to be neighborly Caleb before things get unpleasant, which I do so hate. 22 days now, isn't it? Time does fly." She glanced at Della, brief dismissive a woman waved off. "I wonder if I might have a word with you alone, Caleb, man to well, you know." "Anything you've got to say to me," Caleb said, "you can say in front of Miss Mercer." "How gallant." Vance's mouth curved. "Very well, I'll be brief. I came to offer you a kindness, and I'd have you consider it clear-headed without." The parasol tipped a fraction toward Della, "without sentiment clouding your judgment. Here it is. Sign me a lease on your north section. Just the north section, Caleb, the water and the grays along the creek, a 99-year lease at $1 a year. And I'll tear that acceleration paper up this afternoon. You keep your house. You keep your home pasture. You keep your daughter's roof over her head free and clear, and the whole debt vanishes like it never was. She spread one gloved hand, all reason. You lose nothing but a stretch of rock and water you've never made a red cent off of anyhow. Where's the harm in that? Della felt the trap under the velvet the instant she heard it, and she saw the exact moment Caleb didn't. The north section, Caleb said slowly. That's just the spring and the creek grays. That's the worst land I've got. You'd wipe $1,400 for a lease on my worst land. Call me sentimental, Vance said. Don't, Della said. Both of them looked at her. Don't sign it, Caleb. Don't sign one word of it. Della kept her eyes on Vance. She's not offering to save your home. She's offering to take the only thing on this ranch that's worth a fortune, and leave you the part that's worth nothing, and dress it up as mercy, so you'll thank her while she does it. A 99-year lease on the water, Mrs. Vance. When the railroad comes through in 2 years, needing water by the ton, and you're the one who holds it. Della smiled now, thin and cold. You wouldn't need to foreclose at all, would you? You'd just own the one thing the trains can't run without, and you'd have got it for $1 a year, and a torn-up paper, and Caleb here would have handed it to you himself and called you kind. The silence stretched. Cordelia Vance looked at Della Mercer for a long, long moment, and something changed in her face. The smile stayed, but the eyes behind it went flat and cold, and for the first time wary. You're a sharp one, Vance said softly. I did wonder. A faro dealer would be, I suppose. You read a table. She gathered her reins. It's a pity, dear. In another life, you and I might have understood each other very well. We're neither of us fools, and this town's chock full of fools. The buggy started to turn. The offer stands till the deadline, Caleb. 22 days. When the drive fails, and it will fail, I've seen to it, you'll wish you'd taken the lease and kept your house. Do think of the child. She lifted the parasol in a little farewell. Good day. And she drove out of the yard unhurried and left behind her a silence worse than any shouting. Caleb didn't speak for the rest of the day. He went out to the stock, and he worked like a man trying to outrun a thing that was gaining on him anyway. And Della watched him from the house, and knew that every hour he spent alone with it, the deeper Vance's poison sank. She'd seen men at the table lose exactly like this, not in one big hand, but slow. One small surrender at a time, till the man who'd sat down proud, got up, broke, and grateful for the chair. Vance hadn't come to make Caleb an offer. She'd come to plant a picture in his head, his daughter with a roof safe and warm, and only a stretch of rock and water standing between the child and that safety. She'd come to make doing right feel like robbing his own girl. And it had worked. By supper, Della could see it had worked. Caleb sat at the table and didn't eat and didn't look at her, and when Nora asked him a question, he answered it in a grunt. The old grunt, the fence post. Grunt, the sound Della had thought they'd buried for good, and the child's face fell, and Caleb didn't even notice. And that was how Della knew the man was already half gone, back down into the dark. It was late, with Nora finally abed, that he finally broke. Caleb, Della started. I want you to go. The words dropped between them like a stone down a well. What? I want you to go. He wouldn't look at her. He was looking at the floor, at the wall, at anywhere that wasn't her. Thursday's stage. I'll find your passage somehow. It's the only card left that plays. If you go, she's got no more scandal to hang on me. Maybe then she goes back to waiting on September. Maybe I get the fall to sell cattle proper. Maybe I save the place for Nora if I've just got the one thing to fight instead of the two. His jaw worked. It's not you, Della. God, it's not you. It's that I've got a child. And a child needs a roof more than she needs anything else. And if it comes down to your good name or my daughter's home, I've got to choose the home. A father's got to choose the home. Any father would. His voice was cracking now. So you've got to go, for Nora. You said yourself you'd do anything for that child. Then do this. Go and let me try to save her something." Della stood very still. She understood it. That was the worst of it. She understood it perfectly. It wasn't cruelty. It was a cornered man reaching for the one lever he could still pull, and hating himself, and reaching anyway because the alternative was watching his little girl lose the only home she'd ever known. She could not even be angry. She could only feel the floor tilt under her the way it had on the platform, the old familiar tilt of a woman finding out once again that there was no place in the world that would let her stay. "All right," she said quietly. "If that's... It ain't all right." Nora stood in the doorway to the back room in her nightgown, and her small face was wet and blazing, and neither of them had heard her come, and neither of them knew how long she'd been standing there. Nora go back to... No. The child came into the kitchen like a small storm. "You're sending her away. You're standing there sending her away, just like the mean woman wanted, just like the whole town wanted. And you said, Papa, you said you wouldn't put her on the road. You said it in the church in front of everybody." "Nora, this is grown folks' business and you don't understand." "I understand you're being a fence post again." The word stopped Caleb like a slap. Della saw it land, saw him go white. "You think I don't remember?" Nora's voice was shaking, furious, breaking the voice of a child saying the truest thing she owns. "You think I was too little, I remember, Papa. After Mama died, you went away inside yourself, and you didn't come back for 2 whole years. I'd ask you things, and you'd just grunt. I'd cry, and you wouldn't even hear me. I was all alone in this house with you right there, and you weren't there at all. And I wrote those letters, I stole the coins, and I wrote those letters because I couldn't stand it one more day being alone with a papa that wasn't there." The tears were running freely now, and she didn't wipe them. "And then she came. And she made cornbread, and she taught me to read, and she asked me what I liked, and she stayed. She's the only one who stayed, Papa. When I needed somebody out of the whole world, she's the one who came and the one who stayed. And now you want to act like she doesn't belong here, like she's not, like she's just some woman off a stage." The child's voice finally shattered. "She belongs here more than the ranch does. I'd rather live in a tent with her than in this whole ranch with a fence post. You choose her, Papa. You choose her, or I'll never forgive you, as long as I live." The kitchen rang with it. Caleb Hartley stood in the wreckage of his daughter's words, and his face was not stone anymore. His face was a man's face, cracked all the way open, and Della saw 2 years of buried grief and buried love come pouring up through the cracks all at once, and he opened his mouth and no sound came out. He looked at his daughter. He looked at Della. He looked at the blue plate on the shelf where Mary's dishes lived, and he sat down hard in a kitchen chair and put his face in his hands and wept great silent shaking sobs, the sound of a dam that had held 2 years too long finally going, and Nora ran to him and threw her arms around his bent neck, and he held on to the child like she was the only solid thing in a flood. Della did not go to them. It wasn't hers to go to, not yet. Not that particular grief. She stood by the basin and let a father and a daughter find each other across 2 years of silence, and she wiped her own face with the back of her wrist, and she waited. When Caleb finally lifted his head, his eyes were red and his voice was wrecked, but the man behind it had come all the way home. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it to Nora, and then he said it to Della, and it was a different kind of word than she'd ever heard out of him. "God forgive me. I was going to do it. I was going to sit here and let that woman win and hand you my whole self on a plate and call it being a good father." He wiped his face roughly. "Being a good father. My little girl just told me being a good father meant not being a coward, and she's right, and she's 8, and I'm 36, and I ought to be ashamed clear down to my boots." He looked at Della, and there was something naked in it now, something with no walls left around it. "I don't want you to go. I've not wanted you to go since about the 2nd day, and I've been too scared and too proud and too buried to say it. Don't go, Della. Whatever happens with the note and the drive and that spring and all of it, don't go. Stay. Stay, and let's lose it all together if we have to. But let's not. Let's not lose it. a part being cowards, letting her pick us off one at a time. His voice broke again. Stay. Della Mercer looked at the two of them, the wrecked man and the fierce child clinging to him, and felt the tilt in the floor go still and level and hold. I'll stay, she said, but I'll not stay to lose. She crossed the kitchen then, and she crouched down by the two of them, and she took Nora's hand in one of hers, and after a breath, Caleb's in the other, and her voice, when it came, was low and hard and certain as iron. You listen to me, both of you. I have spent my whole life being run off, out of my father's house by the men he owed, out of my own town by its memory. 600 miles I came to get run off one more time, and I have decided tonight in this kitchen that I am done being run. I am done. She gripped their hands. Cordelia Vance thinks she's beaten us because she works in paper, and we've got no paper to fight back with. But she made a mistake, Caleb. She made one mistake, and it's a big one, and I've been turning it over for 3 days. Her eyes were bright now, not with tears. She did all this in the open. She wired Kansas in front of the town. She read my history out loud in the church. She sent a man to threaten Josiah Reese and every other soul who might help us. She's been so sure she's untouchable that she's left her fingerprints on every wall in this county, and there is one single thing that a woman like Cordelia Vance can't survive, and it isn't a hard drive to Fort Worth. It's the town finding out that the woman who taught them to hate me is stealing them all blind. Caleb went still. The spring. The railroad. If folks knew that their upright Mrs. Vance has been ruining good neighbors on trumped-up morals to grab a fortune in water rights out from under them before the railroad money's even landed. Della's mouth set. Half those men she's got a rope on are only afraid because they think they're alone. Josiah Reese thinks he's the only one. What happens when Josiah Reese finds out there's a dozen of him and that the thing they're all afraid of is one woman's greed, and that greed's about to make her richer than all of them put together off their own ruin? She stood up. She calls a public reckoning every time she wants to win. The church. The wire read out loud. She loves an audience, Caleb, because she's never once lost in front of one. Her chin came up, that same chin, the platform chin. So I mean to give her one more audience, one last public reckoning. Only this time, I'm going to be the one who stands up. And this time, it won't be my history that gets read out loud in front of the whole town. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark toward Clearwater, and her reflection in the black glass was a woman who had stopped running. It'll be hers, Della said. She had 19 days left when she said it, and she did not waste one of them. The first thing she did was the thing Cordelia Vance would never have expected, because it was the thing Vance herself had taught her. She went to the wire office. I want to send 2 messages, she told the operator, laying her coins on the counter, and I'll pay for the replies to come to me here and held for me not read aloud to a soul. And if I find you've whispered a word of either one to Mrs. Vance or anybody else, I'll know where it came from, and so will the whole county. Do we understand each other? The operator, a nervous young man who'd watched Vance read Della's own history off a wire in that church, swallowed and said they did. The first message went to the county seat to the clerk of records, asking a plain question about a plain public fact: every mortgage and note currently held by one Cordelia Vance, and the legal description of the land each one sat on. Public record. Anybody could ask. Almost nobody ever thought to. The second message went to Fort Worth, to the land office of the railroad, and it was the one Della had lain awake 3 nights composing, because it had to be true, and it had to be tempting both. It said in the fewest words she could pay for, that the owner of the Clearwater Spring, the reliable water the company's own surveyors had marked 3 times, that Spring was prepared to negotiate water rights directly, fairly, and at once, and would welcome a company agent to discuss it in person, and that the agent should come quick, because there were other parties attempting to acquire that same water by means the company might wish to know about before it paid anybody $1. There, she said, walking out. Let's see whose wires reach farther. The replies came back over the next 4 days, and they were everything she'd hoped, and worse than she'd feared. The clerk's answer when she read it made her sit down on the wire office bench and go still. Cordelia Vance held the paper on 11 properties in the county. Della spread the legal descriptions on the Hartley table that night with Caleb's county map beside them, and she drew a line with her finger, and Caleb watched the line go and his face changed. "They're all on the creek," he said. "Every one of them. Reese the tanner's the clay place. Every single note she holds sits on water. She don't hold a note on a dry land place in the whole county. Not one. She's been buying the water," Della said, "one debt at a time for 2 years and calling it charity every time she did it. She's not a note holder, Caleb. She's assembling a kingdom, and every man she's got a rope on is a wall in it, and none of them can see the shape of the thing because each one only sees his own rope." The railroad's reply came the 4th day, and it was short, and Della read it standing up and had to read it twice. The company thanked her. The company was very interested in the Clearwater water. The company was in point of fact already in correspondence about that very water with a Mrs. C. Vance of Clearwater, who had represented herself as being in a position to convey the water rights and with whom the company had begun to discuss terms. Della lowered the wire slowly. "She's already selling it," she said. "Caleb, she's already sold the railroad water she doesn't own yet. She's promised them the spring before she's even foreclosed on it. That's how sure she is." And then a cold light coming up in her. That's how sure she is. And that's her second mistake, because she's put it in writing to a company that has no reason on this earth to protect her. She'd rather buy the water cheap from the rightful owner than get tangled in a fraud if only the rightful owner knew to ask. She looked at Caleb. "An agent's coming. On the Thursday stage. The very stage she keeps offering to put me on." She almost laughed. "He'll be here for the reckoning. He just doesn't know yet that's what he's coming to." The rest she did on horseback, quiet in the evenings, one gate at a time. She went to Josiah Reese first, because he was the one who'd wept at his own gate, and she did not ask him for hands this time. She laid the map on his kitchen table and drew the line with her finger, same as she'd done for Caleb, and she watched the old man's face go from grief to confusion to a slow-building fury as he understood that his $600 of debt and Caleb's $1,400 and the tanner's notes were all the same rope, all pulling toward the same water, all held in the same gray-gloved hand. "She'll ruin me if I stand up," Josiah said when she'd finished. But it was a different kind of saying it than at the gate. It was a man arguing with himself. "She'll ruin you if you sit down," Della said. "The only question is whether you go down alone and quiet thanking her, or whether you go down in a room full of your neighbors who've all just learned the same thing you have. She's beaten every one of you the same way, Josiah, by making each man think he's the only one with a rope on his neck. What she can't survive is all of you in one room, looking at each other, finally counting how many of you there are." Josiah Reese looked at the line on the map for a long time. "When?" he said. "Thursday," Della said. "Noon. She'll call the town herself. She can't help it. She loves an audience, and she means to take Caleb's place in front of everybody, so nobody ever dares cross her again. Come to it, Josiah. Bring every man she holds a note on. Don't say a word to a soul beforehand, and when the moment comes, stand up." Della folded the map. "That's all I ask. Not a fight, not a dollar. Just when it's time, don't be sitting down." She said the same thing at 4 more gates, over 3 more nights, and at every one she watched the same thing happen. The grief, the fury, the terrible dawning arithmetic of a man learning he was never alone. Not all of them said yes, but none of them said no. And Cordelia Vance, up in her fine house planning her triumph, heard nothing at all, because a woman who has taught a whole county to be afraid of her stops being able to hear the county whispering. Thursday morning, an hour before the reckoning. Della stood on the platform at Clearwater Station, the same board she'd stepped down onto 9 weeks before, in a torn dress with a broken bag, with the whole town staring, and she watched the stage come in, and this time, she was the one waiting to meet somebody off it. The spare gray man who stepped down looked at her and at the empty platform and touched his hat. "You'd be the lady of the wires," he said. "Prentice." "Della Mercer." "Mercer." He set his case down. "I'll be plain with you, ma'am, since we've not much time, and I've come a long way on a stranger's telegram. I deal in water and right of way, not in feuds, and if you've dragged the railroad's name across the county to settle some private quarrel, I'll be back on the return stage this afternoon, and you'll have made an enemy of a company you very much want as a friend." His eyes were flat and careful. "So tell me straight. Is the thing you wired me true? Does the man who owns that spring want to deal fair and direct? Or is this a scheme?" "It's true," Della said. "Every word. The man who owns the spring is a widower who nearly lost it to a woman who's been buying up this county's water on the sly and already tried to sell it to you out from under him." She held his eyes. "You came to buy water, Mr. Prentice. You did. But you came to a town that's about to find out the truth all at once in one room in about an hour, and I'll not pretend to you it's only business. I'll only tell you that every fact I wired you will stand up in a courthouse, and that the honest deal is also the better deal, and that a careful man ought to be able to see both those things are true at the same time." She paused. "Will you come and listen? That's all I ask. Sit at the back. Listen. And when it's time, tell them the plain truth about what a railroad wants. That's not a favor to me. That's just your business said out loud, where it'll do some good." Harlan Prentice studied her a long moment, the way a man studies a hand of cards he half suspects is honest. "I'll listen," he said. "I make no promises past that." "I'd not trust a man who did," Della said, and led him toward the church. Thursday came hot and bright, and by 11:30, the church was full to the walls, the same as the first day, because Cordelia Vance had sent word up and down the county that the Hartley matter would be settled in public, and folks did not miss a settling. Della walked in with Caleb on one side and Nora on the other, and she was not in rags now. She wore a plain dress Hetty had helped her make over clean and mended, and hers, and she walked up the aisle with her chin up the way she always had. Only this time she was not walking toward a trial. She just didn't tell the room that yet. Vance stood at the front in gray silk papers, squared on her little table, the Reverend hovering unhappy at her elbow, and she smiled her warm, terrible smile when the Hartleys came in. "Caleb, Miss Mercer, and the child, how sweet. Do come to the front. I'd have you close for this. It's kinder, I find, to have hard things done quick." "We'll stand where we like, Cordelia," Caleb said. "You do your talking, as you wish." Vance turned to the room, and her voice took on that smooth carrying weight. "Friends, it grieves me to gather you for this, but the law is the law, and a debt is a debt, and a town that won't say so out loud is a town that's already rotting. 19 days ago, I was forced against every soft feeling in my heart, to call a note that Caleb Hartley has let fall 2 years behind. $1,400. The deadline is today. And I'll ask him now in front of you all, so there's no whispering later that I did it in a corner." She turned. "Caleb Hartley, can you pay?" The room held its breath. "Not today," Caleb said. "Not in cash. Not today. Not in cash." Vance let it ring, sorrowful, satisfied. "Then I've no choice. And neither does the law. The Hartley place comes to me in satisfaction of the debt effective this day, and I'll thank the Reverend to witness it." She lifted a paper. "It's a sad business, but I'll say this much for the comfort of the child: I'm not a hard woman. I'll let them keep till harvest to find other lodging. Nobody can say Cordelia Vance turned a little girl out in... You keep my daughter's name out of your charity." Vance's brow lifted, but she went on. And here it came, the thing she couldn't resist, the cruelty she'd been saving. Because a woman like that could never simply win. She had to grind the loser's face in it. Besides, of course, Caleb. Though I'll say, and I say it for your own good, and the girls, this is what comes of it. You took a strange woman off a stage, a woman with a gambling house past and a mended shawl and no more claim on a home than a stray dog has, and you let her turn your head, and here's the end of it. Ruin." Her gaze slid to Della, slow, contemptuous, meant to be seen by every soul in the room. "I did try to warn you. Women like her don't build homes, Caleb. They pass through them. They move from one man's roof to the next, taking what they can. And when the roof falls in, they simply climb aboard the next stage and go find another. She never meant to stay. Her kind never does. and now you've lost your grandfather's land learning it." The silence that came down over the church was absolute. Nora made a small wounded sound, and Della's hand tightened on the child's shoulder, holding her, still holding her quiet, because it was not yet time. And into that silence Caleb Hartley stepped forward. He didn't step forward to shout. He stepped forward slow, one long stride out from the wall, and he took his hat off as he did it, and he turned it in his hands, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet, the whole packed church leaned in to catch it. "You've got that exactly wrong, Cordelia," he said. "And I'm going to say how, because you said it in front of my daughter, and she's going to remember today her whole life, and I'll not have her remember it your way." He turned not to Vance, but to the room, to his neighbors, to the faces he'd known his whole life. "You all watched this woman get off a stage 9 weeks ago in a torn dress, and every one of you decided in about a second flat what she was. I did too. God help me, I did too. I stood on that platform and looked at her like she was a bill I didn't remember running up." His jaw worked. "And you want to know what that woman with nothing did? She walked into a house that had been dead 2 years. My wife passed and I quit. I'll say it plain in the Lord's house. I quit on my own child. 2 years that little girl talked to a man who wasn't there. And a stranger off a stage with no claim on us and every reason to run looked at my Nora and asked her what she liked to eat." His voice cracked and he pushed through it. "She asked my little girl what she liked. Nobody in this town thought to do that in 2 years, and a ruined woman off a stage did it in an afternoon. She taught my girl to read. She fixed my books and my roof and my broken-down heart, and she did it while every one of you crossed the street from her, and she never once complained of it, and she never once ran." He turned back to Vance, and his voice went hard. "You say her kind passes through. Cordelia, she's the only soul in this county who didn't. You all passed through, passed right on by a grieving man and a motherless girl for 2 years, and never stopped. She stopped. She's the one who stopped." He put his hat back on. "She didn't arrive with nothing. She arrived with the one thing this whole town's forgot how to reckon the worth of. She arrived willing to stay. And I'd sooner lose every acre my granddad ever broke than stand here and let you call that woman a stray in front of the child she saved." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Della felt the whole room hanging tipped, waiting. And she knew Caleb had just done the thing that turned it the thing no ledger of hers could have done, and that now it was hers to finish. For a moment, nobody spoke at all. Then, from the third pew, old Hetty Sloane thumped her cane once on the floorboards, hard, deliberate, into the silence, and said in her dry, carrying voice, "Well, somebody in this town's finally said a true thing out loud. I was beginning to think I'd die first." A few people laughed shaky, and a young mother near the front was wiping her eyes, and Della saw a man she didn't know lean over to the man beside him and murmur something, and the man nod slow. It wasn't the room turning yet. It was the room remembering it could turn the first give in a frozen creek, the first crack running out across the ice. Cordelia Vance heard it too, and her chin came up, and her hand moved to her squared papers like a gambler reaching to cover a bet gone wrong. "How very moving," Vance said, and the silk was back in her voice, but thinner now, stretched over something harder. "A pretty speech doesn't pay a note, Caleb. Sentiment never balanced a ledger yet. When you're all done weeping, the debt will still be due, and the law will still be the law." "You're right, Mrs. Vance," Della said. "It will." She let go of Nora's shoulder. She stepped forward to stand beside Caleb, and she looked at Cordelia Vance, and she smiled. "That was a fine speech, Mr. Hartley," Della said, "and every word of it true, and I'll thank you for it the rest of my life." She turned to the room. "But Mrs. Vance is a woman of business, and speeches don't move her, so let's the rest of us talk business since she's so fond of it. Let's talk all of us together about water." Something flickered in Cordelia Vance's face. The first crack. "This town is called Clearwater," Della said loud and clear and carrying to the back wall. "And I had to be told why, being new. There's a spring on Caleb Hartley's north section that's never once run dry, not in the worst summer any of you can remember. It's the reason this town exists. And it happens," she let it land, that a railroad's coming through this country inside 2 years, and a railroad runs on water, and the company that owns that spring is about to be very, very rich. The room stirred. She had known it would. Not one man in it had put those pieces together because not one man had been given all the pieces at once. Now here's a curious thing. Della drew a folded paper from her sleeve, the county clerk's record, and held it up. This is a list out of the county's own books public, as a church door of every note and mortgage held today by Mrs. Cordelia Vance. 11 of them. And I sat down with a map and I marked where each one sits. And I'll tell you what I found, and any man here can ride to the county seat tomorrow and prove me a liar if I'm one. She swept the room. Every single note she holds sits on the creek. Every one. She doesn't hold $1 of paper on dry land in this whole county. Josiah Reese, your place, the Tanner place, the Hartley place, all of you. Her voice rose. She's been buying the water neighbors. One man's hard year at a time, for 2 years. And every time she did it, she called it Christian charity, carrying a poor neighbor's debt. And every time what she was really doing was tightening a rope on the one thing that's about to be worth a fortune, so that when the railroad came, she'd own all of it, and every one of you would be off your land. The stir became a rumble, heads turning, men looking at each other, at the notes, at the woman in gray, understanding beginning to move through the room like fire through dry grass. "That's slander," Cordelia Vance said, and her voice had lost its silk. "That's a gambling house woman's slander, and I'll not stand. It's the county's own records, Mrs. Vance. I only read them out loud. You taught me how effective that is." Della's eyes didn't leave her. "But you're right that a list of notes proves greed, not a scheme. A woman might hold 11 notes on the creek by chance and mean no harm. So let's not stop at the list. Let's talk about what you've been writing to Fort Worth." And there, for one instant, gone almost before it showed, Cordelia Vance's face went white. "I sent a wire to the railroad's land office," Della said to the room. "Same as she sent one to Kansas about me in this very church 9 weeks ago. Turns out the wires reach Fort Worth too. I told them the rightful owner of the Clearwater Spring would deal with them fair and direct. And do you know what they wired back?" She let it hang, and the room hung with it. They wired back their thanks, and they mentioned being businessmen, and having no notion it was a secret that they were already in correspondence about that same water, with a Mrs. C. Vance, of Clearwater, who'd told them she was in a position to sell them the water rights. Della turned the full weight of it on Vance now. "You'd already sold it, hadn't you? You promised a railroad company the Hartley Spring before you'd even foreclosed on the Hartley place. You were that sure. You sold water you don't own to strangers for a fortune, while you stood in this church and told these good people you were only protecting their morals from me." The rumble broke into open voices now. Somewhere a man swore out loud in the Lord's house and didn't apologize. But Cordelia Vance had not built a kingdom by folding at the first hard hand, and Della watched her gather herself, watched the businesswoman come back up cold and fast, and knew the worst of it wasn't over. "Very clever," Vance said, and her voice was steady again and terrible. "Very clever indeed, dear. But you've forgotten something, all of you, in your excitement." She turned from Della to the room, and now she was not gracious at all. Now she was showing them the iron she'd always kept under the silk. "You've forgotten who holds your paper. Josiah Reese, $600 and 11 months behind. The Tanners, you're behind too. Aren't you Ed behind to me? Every man in this church that this woman's got so stirred up, I hold your notes. And I can call them. Today. This hour. The same clause that took the Hartley place will take yours, every one of you who stands up, and there won't be a railroad in time to save you, because I'll have your land before the first rail's laid." Her smile came back thin as a blade. "So, by all means, stand up. Cheer the gambling house woman. And be off your land by fall, the lot of you. Or sit down and keep your homes, and let me settle the Hartley business as the law allows. It's your choice, gentlemen. It always was." And Della felt the room tip back. She felt it go, felt the fire falter, felt the men who'd half risen sink back down, because fear is older than fairness, and every one of them had children and beds, and their own $1,400 of rope, and Cordelia Vance had just reminded them cold and plain that she could hang them all. Josiah Reese was on his feet, but he was looking around him, and the men beside him weren't rising, and Della saw the old man's courage start to drain out through his boots. This was the moment. She'd known it would come the moment the fear won, if it was going to. "Before any man sits down," Della said, "I'd like him to hear from one more party. A gentleman came in on this morning's stage. The Thursday stage, the very one you keep offering to put me on, Mrs. Vance." She raised her voice. "Mr. Prentice, would you stand up?" At the back of the church a stranger rose. He was a spare, dry man in a good gray traveling suit, a leather case under his arm, and he'd sat unremarked in the back the whole while, and every head in the church turned to him now. "Harlan Prentice," he said in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who dealt in facts for a living. "Land office of the railroad out of Fort Worth. I came at this lady's invitation expecting to talk about buying water." He paused. "I've been sitting here a while now listening, and I find I've learned a good deal I came not knowing. So let me say two things plain, since it seems they'll matter to you folks." He looked at Cordelia Vance without any expression at all. "First, the company has no interest none in buying water from someone who doesn't own it, and considerable interest in not being party to a fraud. Mrs. Vance, our correspondence with you is ended as of this moment, and our attorneys will want to review it." His gaze moved to the room. "Second, and I'd fix on this if I were you gentlemen, the company doesn't need to own your land. We need water and a right-of-way, and we'd far rather pay a fair yearly sum to a dozen settled landowners along this creek than tangle with one party who's clouded her own title with a courthouse full of foreclosures. A railroad likes clean paper and quiet neighbors." He let that sink. "Which is to say, every man in this room who holds his land free and clear when the line comes through stands to make more from us honestly in a year than his whole spread is worth today. But not $1 of that comes to a man who's let his water fall into somebody else's hands first." The silence this time was a different animal than the one before. Della watched the arithmetic move across 40 faces at once. The same cold, beautiful arithmetic she'd run at the table 1,000 times. Every man in that church realizing in the same instant that the thing Cordelia Vance had taught them to fear was the exact thing that would ruin them, and that keeping their land wasn't just brave now, it was worth a fortune. Josiah Reese, still on his feet, stopped looking around him. "I'm behind on my note," he said loud to the whole room. 11 months. She's held it over me 2 years, and I've tipped my hat to her the whole time and hated myself for it." His old voice shook and steadied. "I'm done. I'll take my chances with the railroad and an honest year, and I'll pay Caleb Hartley's $1,400 myself before I'll watch that woman take his water if it comes to that, and I'll take the note back on my own place to do it." He turned to the men beside him. "Ed, you've got water. So have you, Harmon. So have half of you. She can't call all our notes at once. She hasn't the men nor the courts to do it in a season, and by the time she did, the railroad'll have made us all whole. She's been beating us one at a time. Well," he thumped a fist on the pew, "there's no one at a time here today. Stand up." And Ed Tanner stood up. And then Harmon Clay. And then a man Della didn't know. And then 3 more. And then the whole packed church was coming to its feet in a rolling thunder of scraped boots and pews. 40 people rising all at once. Not a mob, not shouting, just standing. All of them standing up together in front of the woman in gray silk who'd spent 2 years making certain they never would. And Cordelia Vance stood alone at the front of a church full of people on their feet. And for the first time since Della had met her, the smile was gone, and there was nothing underneath it but a cornered woman who had finally publicly in front of the whole county she'd ruled by fear lost. She gathered her papers. Her hands were not quite steady, and Della, who had learned long ago to read the exact moment a losing player knows the game is gone, saw her know it. "You'll regret this," Vance said, but it came out thin, and everyone heard that it came out thin. "Every one of you. When the railroad's a rumor again and I still hold your paper." "You won't hold it long, ma'am." Harlan Prentice, again mild as milk. Not once our attorneys have a look at what you wrote us. A person who tries to sell property she's obtained by, let's call it, aggressive foreclosure, with intent to defraud a purchaser, tends to find her clean titles turned to mud. I'd see a lawyer of your own if I were you. A good one. In Fort Worth, not here." He almost smiled. "I don't believe you've many friends left here." Cordelia Vance looked around the church one last time at the standing men at the Reverend who would not meet her eye at Hetty Sloan, grinning her old fierce grin from the third pew at Caleb Hartley, with his hat on and his daughter's hand in his, at Della Mercer, standing plain and unafraid in a made-over dress. And whatever she saw in all those faces, it was the end of something, and she knew it. She walked out of the church without another word, gray silk rustling alone, and the doors swung shut behind her, and nobody rose to follow, and nobody said good day. For a moment, the whole church just stood there in the after-quiet 40 people, not quite believing what they'd done. Then, Nora Hartley, 8 years old, in the plain hush of that packed room, tugged her father's sleeve and said in a whisper that carried clear to the back wall, "Papa, does this mean we get to keep the ranch?" And Caleb Hartley laughed that rusty, cracked, unfamiliar sound. Only it wasn't unfamiliar anymore, and he swept the child up onto his hip in front of the whole town. And he looked over her dark head at the ragged woman who'd stepped off a stage 9 weeks ago, with nothing but a name and a broken carpetbag, and his voice when it came was not quiet at all. "Yeah, baby," he said. "We get to keep everything." Keeping everything, it turned out, still had to be paid for. And Della Mercer was not a woman who let a debt sit even when it was won. They settled it in the churchyard in the hot noon light, with half the county still spilling out the doors and buzzing over what they'd seen. Harlan Prentice found Caleb by the wagon and opened his leather case on the tailboard and talked plain figures the way he did everything. "The company wants that water locked before anybody else gets ideas," Prentice said. "I'm authorized to pay earnest money today against a fair right-of-way and water agreement to be drawn proper by the lawyers this fall. $2,000, Mr. Hartley, to hold your exclusive dealing." He glanced up. "That's not the price of the water. That's just the company's way of shaking hands so hard you can't shake anybody else's. The real money comes over the years, and it'll be a good deal more." Caleb went very still. $2,000 was a sum he'd never held in his life. "Take it," Della said low at his shoulder. "But before you spend a nickel of it on so much as a cup of coffee, we do one thing." "What thing?" "We pay Cordelia Vance every last dollar you owe her. $1,400, in full, today before the deadline's out." Her jaw was set. "I know what you're thinking, Caleb. You're thinking she doesn't deserve a cent after what she's done, and you're right, she doesn't. But this isn't about what she deserves. It's about what can never be taken back." She held his eyes. "If you pay that note in full in front of witnesses before the clock runs out, then the debt is dead, and the ranch is yours clean forever, and there is not a lawyer in Texas who can ever say different. But if you let it lapse out of spite, if you leave $1 of it unpaid because you'd rather see her squirm, then you've handed her a thread to pull, and a woman like that pulls threads for a living." Della's voice softened. "I spent 5 years paying a dead man's debt a nickel at a time, so no one could ever own me through it. Let me teach you the last of what that taught me. You don't beat people like her by hating them. You beat them by owing them nothing. Pay her and be free of her and never think of her again." Caleb looked at the ragged woman who'd stepped off his daughter's forged letters, and something in his face settled into place, like a bone going back into joint. "Reverend," he called. "Doc, Josiah. I'd be obliged if you'd witness a thing." They caught Cordelia Vance at her buggy before she'd got clear of the town, and Caleb Hartley counted $1,400 of the railroad's earnest money into her gloved hand, one bill at a time, in front of the Reverend and the doctor and Josiah Reese. And when he was done, Della said clear enough for the witnesses to hear, "Paid in full on the deadline before all these good people. The note's satisfied. The debt's dead." Cordelia Vance held the money and looked at the two of them, and there was no silk left in her at all. Now just a cornered woman holding the exact sum she'd schemed 2 years to avoid taking. "You think you've won something?" she said. No, ma'am, Della said. I think we've paid what we owed, which is a different thing, and a thing you've never once understood. That's why you're going to lose everything else, and we're not. She stepped back. Good day, Mrs. Vance. I don't expect we'll be speaking again. And as Cordelia Vance climbed into her buggy and drove off alone down the road she'd once ruled, the strangest thing happened. The thing Della had stopped letting herself hope for around about the second week of the Silent War. They came to her, not all at once and not smooth, because men who've been ashamed of themselves for a season don't find the words easy. But Ed Tanner came first, turning his hat in his hands, and said, Miss Mercer, I sang along to that song about you once, in my own kitchen. My boy learned it off me. He couldn't look at her. I'm sorry for it, that's all. I'm sorry for it. You stood up today, Mr. Tanner, Della said. A man who'll stand up in the end is worth 10 who never sat down wrong in the first place because he had something to overcome and did it. We'll say no more about the song. And then Harmon Clay came, and a woman Della had never been introduced to, who pressed a jar of honey into her hands and fled before she could be thanked. And a rancher's wife who'd crossed the street from her a dozen times, and now stood in front of her red-faced, saying she'd be proud to have Della to Sunday dinner, if that would be all right. And Della said it would be all right. She said it to every one of them. Because she had learned in the hardest school there is, that a town is not a wall of faces deciding about you. It is a great many frightened people deciding one at a time whether to be brave, and the ones who finally chose brave deserve to have it counted, and she counted it. Hetty Sloane watched the whole procession from her spot in the shade leaning on her cane, and when the last of them had drifted off, she thumped over to Della and looked up at her with those filmed old eyes gone bright. Took 'em long enough, Hetty said. I've been trying to shame this town into decency for 30 years and never managed it. You did it in 9 weeks. She snorted. You know how you did it. You didn't shame 'em at all. You just refused to leave till they got tired of being ashamed on their own. That's a rarer patience than folks credit. She patted Della's arm with one gnarled hand. You'll do, girl. You'll do. They never did speak to Cordelia Vance again. Whatever the railroad's lawyers found in her letters, it was enough. By the time the leaves turned, Cordelia Vance had sold her fine house and her buggy and gone to live with a widowed sister in Galveston, and the 11 notes she'd hoarded got bought up quiet by the men who owed them at fair terms. Now that they weren't afraid, and her name stopped being a thing, people lowered their voices to say, and became just a thing that had happened. Once a hard summer, the county had come through. But that was all still weeks off, and there was a nearer reckoning waiting, and it was the one Della had been dreading longer than any of them. Because the note was paid, and the ranch was safe, and the fear that had ridden Caleb Hartley for 9 weeks was gone, and with it gone, there was suddenly nothing at all standing between the two of them but the thing they'd never once said out loud. She felt it change that first night home in the quiet, after Nora had finally worn herself out and gone to bed. She and Caleb sat at the table the way they had a dozen nights. Only it wasn't the same, because before there'd always been a wall of trouble between them to talk across. And now the trouble was gone, and there was just a man and a woman and a lamp. Della, Caleb said. Don't, she said. He blinked. You don't know what I was going to say. I know exactly what you were going to say. She kept her hands busy at the mending she didn't need to do. You're a decent man, who's had a hard fright, and you've got a motherless child who loves me, and a house that runs better with me in it, and you're about to do the honorable thing, and offer to make an honest arrangement of it. And I'm telling you, don't, Caleb. Don't say it. Because I couldn't stand to hear it that way, and I'd have to say no, and then we'd both have to live in this house with the no sitting between us, and I'd rather we just leave it be. Caleb sat back. You'd say no. To that, yes. Her voice was tight. I have been a great many things in my life that I didn't choose. I've been a debtor's daughter and a dealer's girl and a name folks whispered and a woman ordered off a stage by an 8-year-old's forged letters. Every station I ever held somebody else picked for me. She set down the mending and looked at him, and there was something raw in it. I'll not add wife of convenience to the list. I'll not be a thing you settled for because it was tidy and the child was fond of me. I've been settled for my whole life, Caleb. If I can't be chosen, actually chosen for myself by a man who'd have wanted me even if I'd come off that stage in silk with money in the bank and no earthly use to him, then I'd sooner not be married at all. I'd sooner be your housekeeper and keep my pride than be your wife and lose it. She stood up. So please, let it be. Good night. And she went to her room, Aunt Sadie's room, the burned quilt room, the room she'd cried in that first night, and she shut the door, and she left Caleb Hartley sitting at the table with everything he'd meant to say still stuck in his throat. He didn't come after her. She half hoped he would and was fiercely glad he didn't both at once, and she lay awake a long time in the dark, thinking she'd done the only thing her pride would let her do, and hating that her pride and her heart had turned out to want such different suppers. For 3 days, Caleb Hartley said almost nothing to her. It near broke her heart, and it made her angry too, because she thought she'd been right, and being right was cold company. He was polite. He was gentle even. But he'd gone quiet in a new way, a thinking way, not the old fence post way, and Della couldn't read it. And not being able to read a man was a thing that had never once happened to her at a card table or anywhere else, and it unsettled her clear down to her boots. On the 4th morning, Nora came and found her at the wash line with a folded paper held in both hands like it was a live bird. "Papa says to give you this," the child said solemnly. "And he says I'm to wait while you read it and not say a word, and then take back your answer. He was real particular about it." Della's hands went still in the wet linen. "What is it?" "It's a letter." Nora's eyes were enormous. "Papa wrote it. He wrote it his own self all last night. I heard the lamp. He made me swear I didn't help with the words, which I didn't, though I offered." She held it out. He said you'd understand why it had to be a letter. He said you'd know." And Della Mercer, standing at a wash line with her sleeves wet to the elbow, understood, and had to grip the line for a second, because it had all started with a letter. A forged one in this child's hand, signed with a name that wasn't hers, asking a stranger what she liked to eat. The whole of it, the stage, the rags, the town, the war, the water, all of it had grown out of a letter written by somebody pretending to be somebody else. And now, here was the real one, in the real hand, choosing this time out in the open with nothing forged and nothing hidden. She dried her hands on her apron slow, and she took it, and she opened it, and she read, "Miss Mercer." It began. Not Della, but Miss Mercer, the way a man writes when he's trying to say a thing exactly right and is afraid of it. "I am no hand with talking, as you have surely noticed, and the once in my life I most need to say a thing plain, my mouth won't do it, so I am doing what my daughter did before me, and writing it down, and I hope you will forgive a man borrowing his child's idea, because it is the only good one he's got. You said you would not be settled for. You said if you could not be chosen for your own self, you would sooner not be married at all. I have thought about nothing else for 4 days. So here is the truth of it, and I have wrote it out careful, so there is no mistake. I am not asking you to marry me because Nora loves you, though she does more than her own life. I am not asking because the house runs better, though it does. I am not asking because you saved my ranch, though you did, and I will owe you for it till I die. I am asking because a woman got off a stage 9 weeks ago that I did not send for, and I looked at her like she was a mistake, and she turned out to be the only thing that ever walked onto this place and made me want to be a man again instead of a fence post. I am asking because you talk plain and you don't bleed for the crowd, and you paid a dead man's debt a nickel at a time so nobody could own you. And I have never in my life admired a soul the way I admire you. I am asking because if you got back on that stage tomorrow in silk with money in the bank and no use for me at all, I would follow it to Kansas on foot. I don't want a housekeeper, Della. I had a wife I loved and lost, and I did not think I would ever want another, and I was wrong, and it is you. It has been you since about the 2nd day, the same as I told you. Only I was too buried to know my own heart. I am choosing you. Not the help of you. Not the tidy of you. You. The whole ragged, proud, plain-talking, stubborn all of you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving I meant it if you will only let me start. Marry me. Not because you have to. Because I am asking freely. Having chose you clear-eyed and glad, the way you had every right to be, chose the first time and never was. Your answer is your own. Whatever it is, this place is your home for as long as you want it, and that is a separate promise that stands no matter what you say to this one. Caleb Hartley. Della read it twice. The second time, she couldn't see the last of it very well, and she had to wipe her eyes with the back of her wet wrist. And Nora, who had sworn not to say a word, was near vibrating out of her skin. Well, the child finally burst, unable to bear it. Is it a good letter? He wrote it 4 times over. There's 4 bad ones in the stove. Is it Miss Mercer? Are you crying? Is it a sad letter? He said it wasn't supposed to be a sad. It's the best letter anybody ever wrote in the history of the world, Della said, and her voice came out wrecked and she didn't care. Where's your father? Barn. He couldn't stand to be in the house while you read it. He said his stomach was... Della was already walking. She found him in the barn, standing at the stall of a horse. He wasn't grooming a currycomb in his hand, and his back to the door, holding himself so stiff and still that she knew he'd heard her come in and couldn't turn around. Caleb Hartley. He turned. Whatever he saw in her face made his own go loose with relief before she'd said a word, but she said it anyway because he'd written his down and she owed him hers out loud. You wrote me a letter choosing me, she said, and you signed it. Your own name, and there is not one forged word in it, and it is the first thing in my whole life anyone ever gave me that I did not have to earn or fight for or pay off a nickel at a time. You just gave it, freely. Her voice broke. So here's my answer out loud in the open, where the whole county can hear it if it wants to. Yes. Yes, Caleb, I'll marry you. Not because I have to, because you asked me plain, and I have wanted to say yes to you since about the 3rd day, and I was too proud to let myself. And I am done being too proud, the same as I am done being run. She was laughing and crying both now. Yes. Caleb Hartley crossed that barn in 3 strides and took her face in his 2 rough hands, hands that had let go of her quick as a stove burn 9 weeks ago on a wagon bench. And this time, he did not let go, and he kissed her like a man who'd been thirsty 2 years and had just now found water that never ran dry. And a small voice from the barn door said, Does this mean I get to call her mama out loud now? For real in front of people? They broke apart, both of them, laughing, and Caleb reached out one arm and pulled the child in against the both of them, and it was Della who answered, crouching down to look Nora in the eye, the way she had that very first day over the burned quilt. Nora Hartley, she said. You wrote a stranger a letter and asked her what she liked to eat, and you dragged her 600 miles under a lie, and it was the bravest fool thing anybody ever did, and it brought me home. You've been calling me Mama in your heart since about the first pan of cornbread, and I've heard every time, and the answer was always yes. She pressed her forehead to the child's. So yes, out loud, in front of the whole world, for real and forever. You go right ahead. Mama! Nora said, testing it out loud for real, and then again, louder, laughing, flinging both arms around Della's neck. Mama! And Della Mercer, who had gotten off a stage 9 weeks before with a broken bag, an mended shawl, and no place in all the world to lay her head, knelt in the straw of a barn in Texas, and held her daughter, and looked up at the man she was going to marry, and understood that she had finally at long last arrived somewhere she would not be made to leave. They married in August, in the same church where the town had twice gathered to judge her. Only this time the town gathered to stand up for her, and it did pack to the walls again, but the faces all turned soft now, the very same faces that had crossed the street from her in the spring. Hetty Sloane sat at the front pew where the bride's mother sits, because Della had asked her to, and the old woman cried the whole way through, and pretended she wasn't. Josiah Reese gave the bride away, walking her up the aisle slow on his old legs, and when the Reverend asked who presented this woman, Josiah said loud, "The whole of Clearwater County does, and about time," and half the church laughed, and the other half wept. Even Harlan Prentice came up from Fort Worth on the stage, and stood at the back in his gray suit, looking pleased in his dry way that a business trip had turned into a wedding. Ada Foley came too, and brought a pie, and did not say a word about the land, and Della let her stay, because a woman who has finally got everything can afford to be generous with a woman who has less, and that is a kind of wealth the Ada Foleys of the world never do learn. Della wore a dress that was not made over and not borrowed and not mended, the first new dress she'd owned since she was a girl, and she carried nothing at all in her hands because she'd spent her whole life carrying a broken bag. She had to hold shut with her thumb, and today she wanted her hands free. There was only one moment that wasn't laughter, and it was the one that mattered most, and it happened the morning of the wedding before the church, when Della asked Caleb to drive her and Nora out to a certain rise on the north section, where the ground was set apart and kept. She stood at Mary Hartley's grave with the child's hand in hers, and she didn't say anything grand because grand wasn't her way. "I'm not here to take your place," Della said to the stone plane the way she said everything. "A body can't. Nora talks about you every day, and I make sure of it, and I always will. And the blue plate stays on the shelf where it belongs, and it's your blue plate, and it always will be." Her voice steadied. "You told your husband not to go hard, and he went hard anyhow, and I'll not lie to a dead woman. It took your little girl to dig him back out. Not me. But he's out now. He laughs now. She reads now. And I mean to spend the rest of my life keeping the promise you couldn't stay to keep, and I wanted to come tell you that to your face, or as near as I can get to it, so you'd know the two of them are looked after and loved, and that you can rest." She laid a hand on the warm stone. "Thank you for them. I'll take good care." Nora leaned her head against Della's arm. "Mama says you'd have liked her cornbread," the child told the stone. "I said she'd have said it was different." "Good?" Della corrected gently. "Different good." Nora agreed, satisfied, and the three of them stood there a while in the summer morning, and then they went and got married. There was a supper after out at the ranch laid on long plank tables the neighbors carried out and set up themselves without being asked, and near the whole county came and ate and stayed late. It was the loudest that yard had ever been. Josiah Reese got up to make a toast, and got about 4 words into it before his voice failed him, and he had to sit back down and just raise his cup, and everybody understood and raised theirs too, and that was a finer toast than any speech would have been. It was Nora who finally said the thing plain the way she always did. She climbed up onto a chair so she could be seen. This 8-year-old who'd started the whole business with a stolen coin and a forged letter, and she waited till the yard went quiet, and then she announced at the top of her lungs, "I want everybody to know I picked her. Out of a newspaper. I read the advertisement, and I picked the nicest one, and I was right." A ripple of laughter ran the tables. "So the next time somebody in this town wants something done proper," Nora finished fists on her hips, "you come ask me because I'm the only one who got it right the first time." The whole yard roared, and Caleb laughed till he had to wipe his eyes, and Della caught the child up off the chair and held her, and over the racket of 100 happy neighbors, old Hetty Sloan called out, "The girl's not wrong," and she wasn't, and everybody knew it, and that was the truest word said all day. The railroad came through 2 years later, the way Prentice said it would, and it drank from the Clearwater Spring, and it paid the Hartleys fare for the privilege year on year, more money than Caleb's granddad could have dreamed breaking that ground with a mule and a slip. They didn't get grand with it. Caleb bought good stock and mended every fence, and paid Josiah Reese back double the $1,400 the old man had once offered to put up, and Reese refused it, and Caleb left it in the man's barn in a coffee tin anyhow, which was a thing Della taught him, that you settle your debts whether the other fellow wants you to or not, because it's not about him, it's about walking free. Della kept the books and taught the county's children their letters 2 afternoons a week in a little school. The railroad money built, and half the students in it were the same children who'd once chanted a cruel song at Nora by the water trough, and Della taught them just as patient and just as good as she taught anybody. Because she'd decided a long time ago that the way you beat the meanness in a place was to outlast it and outkind it. And she did. She never once dealt another hand of cards, but she kept the one skill that House had taught her. She could still read a room, read a face, read the exact moment a frightened soul decided whether to trust or run, and she used it the rest of her life not to take from people, but to know them, which is the same gift turned right side up. And Nora grew, And there came a little brother in time, and then a sister. And the house that had gone dead quiet for 2 years got so loud that Caleb would sometimes stand in the doorway just to listen to the racket of it had in his hand, the way he'd once stood in that same doorway, watching a stranger and his daughter cry over a burned quilt. One evening years on, with the young ones abed and the two of them the last ones up, Della found him standing at that doorway again, looking in at the empty warm kitchen, at the blue plate on its shelf, and the good plates beside it, and the lamp low. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Listening to the quiet," he said. "It's a different quiet than it used to be. Used to be the quiet was the loudest thing in this house, the sound of what wasn't here." He shook his head slow. "Now it's just rest. A whole house full of people resting. I never thought I'd have it back." Della came and stood in the doorway beside him. "You know what the town says now," she said. "The ones that were so cruel in the spring that first year. You know what they tell it like now when they tell the story of the ragged woman who came off the stage." She almost smiled. "They say I came and I fixed the Hartley place. Patched the roof and squared the books and beat Cordelia Vance and saved the ranch. That's how they tell it, like I mended a house." "You did all that." "I did," she said. "But that's not the true thing, and you know it, and I know it, and I'll say it once out loud so it's said." She looked into the warm kitchen at the whole shape of the life they'd built. "I didn't fix the house, Caleb. Houses were never my trouble. I fixed the people inside it. Or no. You fixed each other, you and that brave fool child, and all I did was refuse to leave while you did it." Her voice went low and certain. "A family isn't a thing you're born into, and it isn't a thing you find lying ready-made off a stage. It's a thing you build on purpose with your own 2 hands, one honest day at a time, out of whoever's willing to stay." Nora knew that when she was 8 years old and wrote a lie to fetch herself a mother. She was smarter than the whole grown county put together. Caleb Hartley looked at the woman beside him, the woman he had once looked at. Like a Bill, he didn't remember running up the woman who had arrived with nothing on earth but a name and a broken bag, and had refused against a whole town to be run off, and he took her hand, and this time, neither of them let go. She had come to Clearwater to be turned away one last time, and instead she had stayed and built and belonged, and been chosen freely, plainly, in a hand that was not forged. And out of a dead quiet house, and a grieving man, and one lonely, reckless, loving child, Della Hartley had made the one thing the world had spent her whole life swearing she could never have, and would keep on making it every honest day for the rest of her life. A home that was hers, and a family that had chosen her, and that no one on this earth would ever take away.